Hey, welcome to this edition of Atheist Hangouts. I'm your host, Dave Viviano, also known as Gamma Atheist on Twitter. The topic is the historical unreliability of the New Testament. Dave Muscato from American Atheist. How you doing, Dave?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
All right. We also have Carlton George. He's going to join us for because he's such a good Christian. The last time we had him on, so.
Hello, hey Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, we this time around we're going to do something a little bit different. We still have the PowerPoint, but we're going to teach some things, have some laughs, and also want to let everyone know that if you want to send in your questions, you can send it into the YouTube channel in the comments area, or you can also tweet it to the hashtag Atheist Hangouts. Atheist Hangouts. So I will let you take it away, Mr. Muscato.
Okay. Let's pull this up here. So I'm going to do a screen share. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, you should see a spiral galaxy.
Oh, Carl's making a lot of noise. Yeah, I see it.
Okay. All right, let me get PowerPoint up.
Oh man, Carl's getting a notebook out. I need to. Now we all know that the New Testament is the truth. So you got a lot of convincing to do, Muscato.
Well, actually, the title of the talk is not necessarily that it's unreliable. We'll let you guys decide that as we go. Are we ready, or we're all set then?
Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, yeah.
Before we get started, I was curious. When you talk about the historical reliability of the New Testament, are you talking about it in terms of how close we are to knowing what the original documents actually said, or are you talking about it in terms of whether the things that it says that are historical events or places actually exist?
Well, both of those, about the places existing, about the documents surviving to the present unaltered and intact, but also whether these, as the events as they're recorded, reflect what actually happened in reality historically.
Okay.
Which is really, I mean, that's really what matters as far as ultimately our purpose in studying these things. Okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and feel free to jump in. I would like this to be interactive. That's why we've got people on. We have a couple of other people who may be joining us later. If
we might have a surprise guest.
Time. Yes, we might have a surprise guest. I don't want to say who it is in case it doesn't work out. But
we gotta give him a little bit of a cliffhanger, but then we don't want to disappoint him either.
Exactly. Okay, so do you want to switch it over so it stays locked on the PowerPoint?
Yep, 2 steps ahead of you. We're all set for you. So that way you can still hear us, and everyone will be able to still hear us, but everyone will just still be able to see the PowerPoint the entire time.
Great. Okay, well, let's get started. So the question before us, is the New Testament historically reliable? The title of the talk, Historical Critical Overview. My name is Dave Muscato. I'm the Public Relations Director for American Atheists. If you'd like to reach me, you can do that at 908-276-7300, extension 7. I will not be answering my phone during this talk, so don't bother calling. But that is my number if you ever want to chat with me, if you have questions about American Atheists or anything else. I'm on Twitter. My handle there is just my name, Dave Muscato. I also have a YouTube channel at youtube.com/Dave Muscato. If you want to email me, my email address is dmuscato@atheists.org. So let's get started then. Okay, is the New Testament historically reliable? Nope. Okay, are there any questions?
Wow.
Okay. No, seriously though.
All right, this is your best one yet, Dave.
So, let's, as we're digging in here, some of the first things that I think we need to do are really look at what we're talking about. So, if you just Google what is the New Testament, the WordNet definition from Princeton comes up first, and it's the collection of books of the Gospels, Acts of the Apostles, Pauline and other epistles, and Revelation, composed soon after, I'm going to say, Jesus' death rather than Christ's death, because I don't consider him the Christ, aka the second half of the Christian Bible. So just to break this down here, the Gospels, it just means good news in Greek, and it's just basically the stories about Jesus' birth and his life and his ministry and his death and his resurrection and so on. Acts of the Apostles goes over what happens to his apostles after Jesus dies. An epistle is just, it's a letter, like a letter that you send in the mail. Comes from the Latin word epistula. Paul, that is Saul of Tarsus, who changed his name to Paul after he converted, wrote about half of them, and then there are a bunch of others by James and Jude and Peter and blah blah blah. Revelation is the last book. It talks about the end times, and then the rest of it there is self-explanatory. So we're talking about unreliability. So as far as what that word means, the important thing I want to point out about this is that it's not a yes or no question whether something is unreliable. If something is unreliable, that means it could mislead you, or it could have errors in it. But that doesn't mean that if it has stuff in it that is misleading, that it's necessarily wrong. There could be some stuff in there that is trustworthy and some stuff that isn't. If you find anything in there that's questionable, then you have to be much more critical about everything else, because if there's, if you're admitting that there could be errors in here, and there's at least one, then that draws into scrutiny the rest of the stuff that you're looking at. So as far as the historical critical method, this is also called higher criticism as opposed to lower criticism, which we'll talk about later. It's just literary analysis is what it is. And we're looking at all sorts of things about, for example, who wrote it, where it was written geographically, the wording of it, the contents of it, as opposed to lower criticism, which has to do with when archaeologists find document fragments, the people who turn those fragments into actual written documents that we can study are lower critics. These are the people who take care of things like it says here, transcription errors, figuring out which fragment is part of which document of all of these old documents that would otherwise be lost. There are not many people in the world who are lower critics. It's an extremely painstaking, and I mean, I would not want to do that for a living, but we definitely need these people, or this field would not exist. No study of ancient history would exist. So I'm really grateful that there are people who do that for a living. So a little bit about what history is as a social science. It is a social science. By its nature, though, you can't repeat it. I mean, that's what makes history different from every other social science. But it does make testable predictions, and it's falsifiable. In other words, we can predict where we should be able to find something if we dig there, like archaeologically, and if we find something that shouldn't be there, then that disproves our hypothesis about things. So it's a science in that sense. It is subject to the problem of induction, to David Hume's problem of induction. So it is not possible to be 100% certain about these things, unlike mathematics. In other words, it has to do with evidence. You build a case for something rather than you prove something. And this gets more and more difficult the further into the past that you go, especially when you're talking about ill-preserved events. We have more records from places like the Middle East than some other places around the world, because the Middle East is very dry. If you're looking at some place like the Amazon, where, first of all, most native cultures there don't have writing at all, but it's so wet that nothing lasts anyway. So I mean, we know almost nothing about ancient history in those cultures. Okay, so I mentioned this already, that it's founded upon inference and probability. So as far as what a historian does as the job, is to try to figure out what is the most likely order of events in the past and explaining as the greatest detail possible what those were within reason. That is, they use logic to apply evidence to figure out what makes sense. Based provisionally on available evidence means that you are willing to change your mind if you find something that would seek to do that, and available evidence means that you're always looking for new stuff that would disprove what you think happened, and you're again willing to change your mind if you find something new. So, you guys familiar with the law of parsimony? You know what this is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just gonna breeze through this in case there are people watching who don't. It's otherwise known as Occam's razor. It was formalized by William of Occam in 1327, although I think it was probably around before that. The dictionary definition, this is from Merriam-Webster's Third New International Unabridged. I think it just says like economy of assumptions and reasoning or something like that. Basically, just you don't want to assume more than you have to when you're reasoning something through. It's not necessarily the case, but generally speaking, the fewer assumptions you have to make in order to put together a hypothesis, the more likely you are to be correct. Not necessarily that you are, but the more likely you are. So that's something that we have to keep in mind anytime we're doing history. Just like no scientist in any scientific field would say that it's impossible that they're wrong, legitimate historians will also admit that they could be wrong. This is not something that you will hear from very religious historians sometimes if they are not able to compartmentalize very well. That should be a tip-off to you that they are not taking their job seriously and the duties and responsibilities of their job seriously if they insist that Jesus rose from the dead and this is, or whatever it is, that they're saying this definitely happened, because we can't say that. Anybody who tries to tell you that they are absolutely certain, 100% certain, it is impossible that I'm wrong, that something happened in the past, especially if they weren't there personally, although even if they were there personally, that doesn't necessarily prove it for reasons we'll go over later, is full of shit. So keep that in mind. So as far as what we want to do, I'm going to speed this up a little. 3 main goals. We want to figure out to what degree the New Testament authors were in a position even to offer reliable testimony in the first place. If they were not in a position to know what really happened, it makes no difference what they wrote, because we shouldn't bother believing what they had to say. We could learn other things from what they wrote, like cultural values and stuff like that. But as far as historical events, if we don't have any reason to think that they actually knew what happened, then we don't really care as far as history is concerned. Something kind of funny, it makes me chuckle anyway. Testimony, the etymology, I can't talk today, etymology of that word, it's the same root as testes in Hebrew. So what you're literally doing when you give testimony is you're swearing by your testicles, and that's why in ancient cultures they used this word for a man testifying, and women couldn't testify because they lacked the proper equipment. So, okay, so assuming that they were in a position to offer reliable testimony in the first place, then we have to ask, did they in fact do that? Did they offer reliable testimony when they were writing this stuff down? There are all sorts of reasons that somebody might not actually write down what really happened, even if they know what really happened. We see this happen all the time today in courtrooms. There are personal interrelationship pressures, like, for example, you might not want to testify against a friend of yours. You might want to testify against somebody you don't like and make something up. You might be under financial pressures to change your story. In other words, if somebody's bribing you, or the other way around, if somebody is extorting from you. There's actually constitutional protection against testifying against your spouse, because it's just assumed that you're not going to be honest and that you're going to do whatever you have to protect your spouse. It falls under the same constitutional protection as testifying against yourself in the Fifth Amendment. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So assuming that they were in a position to offer reliable testimony, and assuming that they actually did offer reliable testimony, then the third question that we have to ask is, did what they write down, what was written down, survive to us today, almost 2,000 years after they wrote it, which is a whole other mess. So we'll get into that as well. If any of these three things, after looking at them objectively as we can, of course, nobody is 100% objective, but as objectively as possible with an open mind, if we find ourselves with a reasonable doubt, that is, would a reasonable person have a decent reason for doubting these things, about any of these three things, then we cannot say that the New Testament is a reliable, trustworthy confirmation of the truth claims of the Christian religion. So this is what we'll keep in mind as we move through the presentation. You guys familiar with Evidence, the channel on YouTube?
No.
No.
Oh, you have to look this up. It's a wonderful, wonderful channel. He spells it like that, and anyway, it's just an inside joke for people who know his stuff. So as far as evidence, though, one thing to keep in mind, not all evidence is created equal. There are certain types of evidence that historians prefer to find, and other types of evidence that will take it, but it's not what we really like. I mean, the more evidence you have, the closer in time it is. I'll go through this here in a second, but it's just important to keep in mind that just saying we have evidence for this is not enough. What kind of evidence you have matters a lot. Contemporary evidence, that is evidence that is from the same time period or the same time exactly that you're talking about, is much, much better than evidence from much later. If we have something recorded, like for example, the way we do this today, we have reporters that attend events or press conferences or whatever. They take notes, they have video cameras, they have audio recorders, and then the next day or even the same day, websites, newspapers, whatever, will put out their story. That's contemporary evidence. That's ideal. That's the way you want to do it. The way that it was done in the ancient world, sometimes it was done that way. It's not usual that we have those types of records. More often we have copies of things from decades or centuries later. So they're less reliable when you're talking about extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence, and they're less reliable when you're talking about things like verbatim wordings of exactly what somebody said, even if it's not an extraordinary claim. Something else that we look for aside from contemporary sources, I mean, like I was saying, the closer in time to when the event happened, the better, but we'll take it if we don't have that, is lots of sources. The more sources you have, the better. If you just have one witness who is writing about something, that doesn't mean that it's wrong, but the more people you have attesting to something, the stronger you can be confident that what they're saying is accurate. Something that's important to keep in mind, though, as far as multiple sources, is that they have to be independent sources. In other words, if you have a bunch of people who are all writing about this, but you have evidence that they were collaborating, in other words, they were working together to produce the materials that they're writing, that doesn't mean anything then. I mean, it shows that this was an influential story that's spread geographically or whatever, but it doesn't mean that it's more evidence that it's true. And we see this today too, like for example, the Associated Press, if you're familiar with how their business model works, basically they have reporters all over the country who will cover all these different stories wherever they are occurring, and then your local paper can purchase column inches to fill up space in their paper so they don't have to physically send a reporter. Like for example, the Chicago Sun-Times or something, they might not have a reporter in Los Angeles to cover something, but AP does, so they will buy the story from AP. When you're saying this story about, whatever the gunshots at LAX last week, this story appeared, in hundreds of newspapers, but it's the same story in all of these sources. You can't say this was reported hundreds of times and we have hundreds of sources that this happened. We have one source that this happened. It's just in hundreds of places. So that's something to keep in mind too. The phrase that historians use when they're talking about independent sources versus multiple sources is corroboration without collaboration. If you have independent sources, that is, they weren't collaborating, but they agree with what they're saying, that is, they corroborate, then that's good. That's what we want. So one thing that we look at is it internally consistent, the documents that we have. If we have a document that disagrees within itself, that's not good. Just as an example, in John 2, the first miracle that Jesus is said to have done after traveling from Judea to Galilee was turning water into wine. Then in John 2:23 it says that there were many miracles, and then in John 4:54 it says he healed a nobleman's son, and the author says that it was the second miracle that Jesus did after traveling from Judea to Galilee. So that's obviously an internal inconsistency. You can't have all of those things be true. Either one of those is inserted that's not real, or none of them are real. But that calls into question the credibility of the entire document. And then the other thing would be external consistency. So like, for example, if you're talking about a landmark, like, for example, the town of Nazareth, which we have no evidence existed until the middle of the 1st century, but the books say that that's where Jesus was raised in the beginning of the 1st century. That's not good for the historical reliability of these documents. Now, this would be comparing it to something like archaeology. The example that I like to give to explain this a little better, if somebody handed me a medical textbook about hematology and I read it, I would have no way of knowing if any of that stuff is true. I don't know anything about hematology. I am not a medical oncologist. But a hematologist who has studied these things in the lab could tell you if the information in that textbook is accurate or not, because they're comparing it to external things, not just whether it's internally consistent. Okay, so one thing we want to know, is it unbiased? Were the people who were writing this stuff, did they have some incentive to say that things were a certain way or things were not a certain way? I'm going to speed this up a little bit. So something important to keep in mind, the Gospels and the Pauline epistles, these are our ancient sources for information about Jesus' life. We don't have anything else. There is nothing else from the 1st century that talks at all about Jesus. No Roman or Jewish historian mentions him at all from the 1st century. No poets mention him. There's no inscriptions of him, references to him whatsoever. Jesus' name does not exist. Jesus of Nazareth, I mean, there are other people named Jesus. But this character, Jesus, who became called the Christ in the 2nd century, there is no evidence he existed at all from the 1st century. That's something aside from what later became the New Testament, that is. That's something we'll talk about a little bit later. So as far as the Pauline epistles and the Gospels, the question that matters to us, are these the kinds of sources that historians want? No, they're not. They're not even close to the kinds of sources that we want. This is what we want, and I mean, it's supposed to be funny, but in all seriousness here, we have crime scene tape blocking off the scene, the crime scene. You don't want people contaminating your scene, putting evidence that wasn't there, taking evidence that was there. They have cameras, they're photographing what happened, recording it in ways that can't be altered as easily, interviewing eyewitnesses the day that it happened, immediately after it happened. You would hope that they are giving medical attention to people that need it, but the point is, this is how we do it today. There's a reason that we do it this way today, and there's a reason that we can, on that basis, trust newspaper and so on accounts given in modern times more than we can trust ancient accounts. Okay, so if you haven't read the New Testament, and if you're not Christian, I wouldn't expect you to have read it. If you are Christian, or if you were Christian and you were Christian for more than 6 months and you're illiterate, I consider you without excuse for not having read it. It's shorter than Harry Potter, and I do not understand Christians who say, it's my favorite book, and you say, really, have you read it? And they say, oh, well, no. But anyway, so getting on with it. So just to familiarize you with it for the rest of the talk, in case you're not familiar with it, there are 4 Gospels that are canonical, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're usually listed in this order, even though this is not the order in which they were written. Mark was the first one that was written chronologically. Matthew and Luke came about the same time after Mark, and then John was the last one that was written chronologically. There's also Acts of the Apostles, Praxis Ion Apostolon. These were allegedly written by Luke. We'll get back to that. There are 14 what are called Pauline epistles, that is, letters written by Paul, or allegedly written by Paul. Now, the stars here have some meanings. There are 7 what are called undisputed epistles, that is, the majority, or the consensus view, I should say, of historians is that these are truly, legitimately written by Paul. We don't really dispute that. There are several, the ones with 2 stars, that are what are called pseudepigraphic epistles. Pseudepigraphic is a nice euphemism in scholarship for a forgery. I mean, today we would just call this a forgery. It's just a document that was written in the name of somebody else in order to give it credibility. It's not actually written by this person. So the 2-star ones are ones that are attributed to Paul, but modern analysis indicates that they are forgeries. 3 stars means that scholars are about evenly divided. The more liberal scholars tend to think that they are not Pauline, and the more conservative scholars tend to think that they are. And 1 star, Hebrews at the end there, is internally anonymous. It does not say who wrote it. It's usually attributed to Paul by pastors and so on, but modern scholars don't really have much of an idea of who wrote it because it doesn't claim to be written by anybody. So there are also 7 what are called Catholic epistles. Catholic just means universal, appealing to everybody, as opposed to the pastoral epistles, which are the ones that Paul wrote. It's related to the word pastor. He was teaching leaders of local churches how they ought to instruct their congregations. Catholic epistles are different. These are named after their alleged authors rather than their recipients, like the Pauline epistles. So the alleged authors of the Pauline epistles, James, Peter, John, and Jude. We'll come back to that here. And then the last book, Apocalypsis, also called the Apocalypse of John or Revelation, may have been written by the same author who wrote the Gospel according to John. We'll come back to that later, and this, like I was saying before, describes the end times. So that's the New Testament. There are 27 books total. It's an anthology. All right, so looking at these 27 books, now this is for some audience participation here. Out of the 4 canonical Gospels, the 4 that were voted into the New Testament, how many do you think are wholly preserved? That is, we have the entire thing from antiquity, which I'm going to define as before 500 CE. What do you guys think?
You mean in their original form, as an entire document?
It just as an entire document. I mean, because they were copies, they would have had editing and copying problems. But aside from that, though, of ones that we have the whole thing preserved, out of the 4, what do you think? If you just were guessing.
I would guess 1.
Okay. The actual answer is 16. We have 16 Gospels from antiquity. They are not all in the New Testament. 4 of them are, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or what are called canonical, which just means they're part of the official canon. There are also 12 are called apocryphal Gospels. These apocryphal, it just the Greek, it just means uncertain origin, basically. These are ones that even ancient scholars were not sure about where they came from and did not think that they should be included. Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Truth, Gospel of the Egyptians, and so on. There are also what are called the infancy Gospels, which talk about Jesus when he was a young child. The Gospels that made it into the books, into the New Testament, talk about him as a baby. They talk about him around the time of his bar mitzvah when he was 13, and then they just skip up to when he was an adult, when his ministry began at age 30. They don't really talk about him as a child or as a teenager, but the infancy Gospels do. So we also have a couple other different kinds, what are called lost, also known as referenced. That is, we have correspondence, or we have a history book or something that will mention a gospel. They'll say the name of it, but we don't have that book. We don't have fragments of that book. We've never found it. So it's a lost book. It's just disappeared to history. There's also a category of books called fragmentary, which is we have found little pieces of it, but not enough that we can actually piece it back together. Partially preserved, which means that we found enough fragments or pages that we can say this is the bulk of the book, but not enough for us to say that we have the book. And then reconstructed, meaning we found enough pages or enough fragments that we can say safely that we have the whole thing. So how many of those that fit any of those four, how many of those do you think we have from antiquity, if you just had to guess?
Go ahead, Dave. I made a fool of myself the first time. It's your turn.
No, I'm the host. I'm not allowed to. That's why we're right.
That was a trick question anyway. Because it started off with how many of the four. You can't have an answer of 16.
Okay, well, the answer to this is 44. So we're talking quite a few Gospels here. There are 60 from ancient times, and then there are what are called modern Gospels, about 25 of those. For example, the Book of Mormon. Now, of course, most Christians do not consider that a legitimate gospel, but Mormons do. I mean, it actually is a religious text. But taken all together, there are, as far as Gospels, there are the 4 that made it into the New Testament, about 85 total. So, I mean, there's a lot of material here to work with, a lot of material to study. But the main thing to keep in mind about all of this is that all of this stuff is questionable. I mean, even in ancient times, people questioned whether this stuff is legit or not, and this is a dispute that's been going on for a very, very long time. It continues today. Like I was talking about the apocryphal ones. The Catholic Church, for example, considers the apocryphal ones important enough and historically significant enough to include in their Bible, whereas Protestant churches don't do that. And Mormon churches include the Book of Mormon and so on, and Doctrines and Covenants and some other books. But, okay. That makes me giggle. Okay, so this here, this chart, and I'm going to skip going through it to save on time, but this chart is basically a breakdown of what's called the traditional authorship of the New Testament. So according to, now if you go to church and you ask a pastor who wrote the books in the New Testament, this is the story you will get. They will say that Paul wrote the Pauline epistles, which are listed over there to the right. Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke and Acts of the Apostles. Matthew wrote Matthew. John wrote the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Revelation. Peter wrote 1st and 2nd Peter. The Epistle of Jude was, of course, written by Jude, and the Epistle of James was written by James. Those two are both brothers of Jesus. So this is the story, is according to pastors, according to churches, of where all these books came from. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Pretty much every single thing on this chart is complete bullshit. There is almost nothing on here that's actually accurate as far as what scholars have to say about where these books came from. And what really makes me upset is that anybody who actually went to seminary and took classes, I mean, if you go to seminary to be a pastor, you are required to take classes on the historical Jesus and modern scholarship. You know this stuff, but they still teach that all of these were written by Paul and that, you know, all of these were written by John and so on. It's a lie. It's not true. So our first question there, were the New Testament authors in a position to offer reliable primary source testimony? I want to stress this. Not a single author of any book of the New Testament was an eyewitness to Jesus' birth, life, ministry, trial, or death. They were all written by people who lived later or who never met him but lived during the same time as him. Not a single author met him in person, okay? None of the New Testament authors claims to have met him in person or claims to be an eyewitness. In fact, 2 of them, Paul and Luke explicitly tell us that they were not eyewitnesses. At the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, he tells us. By the way, Luke is the only Gospel writer who tells us why he's writing his book. The other three Gospels don't. They just jump into the story. They don't give us a context for what the writer's purpose of doing this is. It could just be to record oral mythology. It doesn't actually say, I'm doing this in order to record true history. They don't open it up by saying this is a history account. But Luke starts off by saying, I'm writing this to you, great Theophilus, which just means person who loves God, for the purposes of recording what really happened, so that these things aren't distorted over time. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can go check with the elders, some of whom are still alive, to verify the story. So he tells us why he's writing. Then, immediately after this introduction that is great, that historians love to see those kinds of things, he just basically goes from that into a verbatim copy of the Gospel of Mark for the rest of it. So I mean, it's actually just an introduction tacked on to Mark. That's a little bit exaggerated, but it makes the point. And then Paul also explicitly tells us that he never met Jesus while he was alive. This is completely undisputed. He had a vision of Jesus after Jesus died at Damascus, where he converted, but he never met Jesus in person. And together, these authors, I say together with a star because in actual fact, neither of them wrote as many books as are attributed to them. But if you follow the traditional authorship story, more than a third of the New Testament, they tell us that they're not eyewitnesses. So if anybody tries to tell you that the books were written by eyewitnesses, say, actually, not only were none of them written by eyewitnesses, but in the case of over a third of the books, they tell us that they are not eyewitnesses. So, no. Talking again about higher criticism, this is not to be confused with exegesis. Exegesis is looking at the interpretation of semantic content of a text, critical explanation. So trying to talk about what they meant, trying to talk about how this should be interpreted for and applied to modern life. This is what pastors and theologians do. This is not what higher critics do. Although on occasion critics have to do some of this to understand what their teachings were, to try to decide if this is a genuine piece from this author or not, and certain things like that, if it fits their style and so on. But in general, higher criticism and exegesis are not the same thing. It's also known as historical criticism. Main questions we have, the number one question, who wrote it? Is this legitimately written by the person who's claimed to have written it? If we don't know who has claimed to have written it, who could it possibly be? Where was it written? In other words, just geographically speaking, just finding something somewhere sometimes gives you a clue about where it was written, but not necessarily, because these things traveled and they were copied and they came and went over time and so on. And when was it written? Sometimes you can tell by context, sometimes you can tell by where copies are found, all sorts of things. But those are mainly what you're concerned about as a higher critic, answering those questions. There is sometimes a blurry line between historical and textual criticism, also known as lower criticism, just because trying to piece these things back together, trying to figure out which ones are authentic and which ones fit with which documents and so on, it can be tricky. So how did the books get their names? I talked a little bit about this at the beginning. The epistles, the letters, are named after either their recipients in the case of the pastoral epistles, or their alleged authors in the case of the Catholic epistles. The Gospels, the four Gospels, are named after their quote-unquote traditional authors. I say named after their authors because, as we know, they are actually not written by the apostles. So when you say Gospel according to John, Gospel according to Matthew, Gospel according to Luke, whatever, those are not who actually wrote them. Those are the names assigned to them. Acts of the Apostles chronicles the apostolic age, which is around the time Jesus died until the end of the 1st century. Then Revelation, yes, okay. And Revelation describes the end times. We don't know according to the book, whether it's supposed to be symbolic or whether it's actually supposed to be an accurate account of what's going to happen. If you've never read this, even if you don't want to read the whole New Testament or the whole Bible, I really recommend reading Revelation. It's a trip, and I mean that quite literally. Whoever wrote that book was seriously tripping on acid. There is some really, really crazy. You have no idea. I don't want to spoil it, but it's like, I mean, it's Alice in Wonderland times 10. It's crazy. Okay. The reason it's called, the reason some people think that it was written by the same author as the Gospel according to John is that in it, in several places, the author refers to himself as John. He says that his name is John. He also says that he lives on the island of Patmos. So we refer to him as John of Patmos to differentiate him from the Gospel writer John. Most scholars, virtually all scholars, the consensus of them is that these Johns are, neither of them are the same person as the Apostle John. Okay, so something I want to stress here, the historical apostles, the people who allegedly wrote the epistles of Paul and Luke and then the Gospels and so on, they were Aramaic speaking, they were uneducated, they were peasants, they're from Galilee, they were, with the exception of Paul, who was a Pharisee and was very well educated, they were not highly literate Greek-speaking people who knew how to write, which is clearly the authors of these books. I mean, Greek it's a totally, they were written, the books originally in Koine Greek. The authors seem to have virtually no knowledge of Jewish custom, of landmarks in Galilee and in places where these stories took place in Judea. I mean, it's just completely obvious that they were not the same people. Some of them were fishermen. Levi, Matthew was a tax collector. When I say tax collector, I don't mean like we think of today, like an IRS agent, who went to school for accounting or something. Back then, a tax collector, the reason they were hated so much is they basically went door to door. They were thugs. They went door to door beating people up for not paying their taxes. We're not talking about educated people here who were literate. A very small percentage of people in the ancient world were able to read and write, were able to read, and even smaller percentage were able to write. And it's just ridiculous to think that fishermen and tax collectors wrote these books, especially considering it's a different language and it was decades late. It's just, anyway, we'll come back to that. Something else I want to point out, Peter, who wrote 1st and 2nd Peter, and John, who allegedly wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Revelation and the Gospel of John, in Acts 4:13, it explicitly says they were illiterate. It says that in there. So there's no way that these people wrote these books. Okay. So continuing, the short answer to how these books got their names, by committee vote centuries later. All 4 of the canonical Gospels were originally untitled and don't have names attached to them. The names were attached by committee vote in order to give them credibility. And notice that they are all written in 3rd person. It's not like these are first-hand accounts of what happened. They are oral mythologies or possibly reconstructions of history, at least in Luke's case. He starts off in 1st person and then switches to 3rd. So we're not talking about a normal, historical account by someone who was there. The exception here, Revelation, as I said before, he refers to himself several times as John, which is why it's also sometimes called the Apocalypse of John. So as far as when it was written, this is not really a question that I can just answer, because there isn't a single answer. Like I said before, this is an anthology. It's 27 books that were compiled over time. Paul, the first book that he wrote was written, they think, in 51 CE, but we only have copies of these. We don't know exactly when they were written. We're just going by context about things that were going on at the time that we have other references to. The earliest complete copies of any single book in the New Testament date to the 3rd century, so hundreds of years after these events took place. The earliest complete copy of the entire New Testament, the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus, which are both in the Vatican vaults, we're not really sure which one of those came first, but they're both from the 4th century, so 300 years after these events took place. The canonical Gospels, Mark was written first. It could not have been written before the year 70 because it describes some events that happened in the year 70. John, as I was saying before, is the last of the 4 canonical Gospels to be composed chronologically. It was written around the year 95. Some people even dated a little bit later than that. Most scholars agree that all of the autographs, that is the original actual handwritten manuscripts of the canonical New Testament, were composed by 110. That's at the latest. All the books were written by then. The 27-book anthology, that is the whole thing put together, it might have been compiled as early as the 200s. We have a reference to this by a guy named Origen. The problem with that is he doesn't list the books. He just says there are 27 of them. So we actually don't know from as early as the 200s that it's the same compilation that we have now. In 367, Athanasius lists them, so we know for sure by then it was the same books. But we don't know actually which versions of which books, because there are many, many versions of them floating around until much later, and there are even today different translations based on different source documents that you can get depending on which one you want. This was not officially settled until the Council of Trent in the 16th century, and then there's the Apocrypha on top of that, that they're still disputing. It just keeps going on. So this is more specifically how the New Testament came to be these 27 books. Basically, all these local churches, who each had their own books that they were using, sent representatives, which later became bishops, is what they were called. They voted on which books made it in, which ones did not make it in. They voted on what to call the books as far as their names and who might have written them. This is an artist's rendering of it from 40 years later. And this is what it looks like. It was a vote. It wasn't like they found these books that are signed by the author that are, reliable as far as where they came from. It just didn't happen like that. So this is the real story, and I'm not going to go through this, but this is the real story about where these books came from. It's much, much more complicated than the so-called traditional authorship story. If you look here, I don't know if you guys can see this very well, but it's color-coded, so the up and down vertically tells you where these books were composed. Quell and Gospel of Matthew were composed in Galilee, Gospel of Thomas, 1 Peter, so on, excuse me, just Gospel of Peter and Gospel of Thomas and so on in Syria, in Asia Minor, which is today known as Turkey. That's where the Joanine community was, so that's where Revelation and the Gospel of John were composed, and so on, Greece and Rome there at the top. Quell at the bottom left there, that's called, for short, the Q document. It plays into this thing called the two-source hypothesis. I don't want to get too involved in this. I can tell you guys more about it later if you're curious. But basically, the important thing to take away from that is that Matthew and Luke copy very, very heavily off of Mark. Those three are called the Synoptic Gospels, which just basically means they agree with each other a lot, which isn't a surprise because word for word they're almost exactly the same. About 90% of Mark appears verbatim in Matthew, and about 60% of Mark appears verbatim in Luke. And then there's some other stuff that's put in on top of those.
Dave?
Yes.
A question, if I can interject.
Sure.
Dave, I'm gonna revert to my Christian self from years ago.
Okay.
Just the typical argument or the typical objection that you hear, especially when you're talking about the Synoptic Gospels, is that the Christians will argue that you can't please an atheist because on the one hand the atheist will complain because the documents are different, and then and use that as evidence that they're not valid, and then out of the other side of their mouth they'll say, well, now they're too much alike, so once again they lose validity. So how do you address that?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying before about corroboration without collaboration. If they agree with each other, it would be unusual and suspicious if they agreed with each other in every detail. That's not how people's memories work, especially decades later. If you've ever watched a courtroom drama, I mean, or been to court yourself, you know that people recall things very, very differently, even if they really were both there. So if it's word for word the same, it's probably copied off of it. And that's what we see with Mark and Matthew and Luke. I mean, verbatim copies. There are some sections that are adjusted or have other scenes inserted, but it's very clear that the author of Matthew had access to Mark and was copying off of it, and similarly with the author of the Gospel of Luke had access to Mark. It is also thought, and this is why they call it the two-source hypothesis, that both authors had access to something called Quell, which is just German for source, what they call the Q document, which has other information that we actually don't have this document. It's a hypothesized document that we've never found, but if we are able to find it, this would verify that they were basically copying off of these two books and just deciding which to insert, which also makes a lot of sense considering that they were written so much later and so on. But yeah, it is definitely suspicious if they agree too much. It's also suspicious for obvious reasons if they disagree too much. So it's really just a matter of common ground about you want to find ideally two stories that are written in different styles that do not have verbatim copy but tell the same story, which is not what we have. We have two accounts that tell the same story because they have it written in the same wording, and that is suspicious.
Okay, good answer. Thank you.
And just real quick, while we have that pause,
Yeah.
I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question, send it into the Twitter hashtag Atheist Hangouts, or you can put it in the YouTube comments.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in one more time, then I'll let you keep going. And you may be getting to this, so I hope I'm not stealing any thunder here. But when we're talking about the Council of Trent, we're talking about Council of Nicaea, and we're talking about putting together the original 27 documents. Another interesting thing, too, Martin Luther, during the Protestant Reformation, wanted to cut out Hebrews, James, Jude, and Revelation because they disagreed with his theological views. So, and certainly the Catholic Church has different books of the New Testament, apocryphal books, than the Protestants do. So we still haven't found any agreement, and different than each.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah. And actually, I think it's kind of interesting. The Gospel of John, because it disagrees so much. I was talking about before, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because they agree with each other. John disagrees so much that when they were voting on this, it actually only made it in by one vote. It was almost not one of the canonical Gospels. It tells such a different story. Mark and John both do not talk about Jesus' birth at all. The whole story about the wise men coming from the east, and they wanted to give gifts of gold and incense and and myrrh to Jesus, and they went to Herod and all that whole story. That is in neither Mark nor John. Similarly, the whole story of the census, and they had to return to their ancestral, all that about.
Never occurred.
Yeah, well, it didn't just not occur, but it's only in one of the four Gospels, and there's a contradicting story. So in the one book, in Luke, they tell the story about Herod and blah blah blah, and how they had to escape to Egypt because the 2-year-olds were all killed by the Roman soldiers to prevent the client king from whatever. So that story is contradicted by the story of the census. According to the census, they lived, Mary and Joseph lived in Nazareth, traveled to Bethlehem while she was 9 months pregnant, on foot, by the way, to register for the census. When they got there, the inn was full. She went into labor. They gave birth in the horse trough in the stable. So that's the story in Matthew. In Luke, their house, it doesn't say inn, it says house was in Bethlehem. They lived in Bethlehem, and they left and then came back. So it's very contradicting. I don't see how you could possibly reconcile those details. It's just
if I can ask one more, and I don't want to
Sure.
derail your presentation, but you also have another argument that you would typically get, especially when you talk about authorship, is the argument that these people, by putting this stuff down and committing this to paper, by publicly coming out, if you will, in favor of Jesus as the Messiah, that these people, these authors, whoever they might be, were putting their lives at risk in a very real way. Okay, and so the question then becomes, doesn't that help establish some of the authenticity, in the sense that what motivation could they possibly have to put their lives at risk in order to do this if they did not believe that what they were writing was true?
All that tells us is that they believed what they were saying is true. There are many, many people today who would gladly die if they had to, because they believe something that's true that we can clearly show is false. There are many people, not so much Christians today in modern times, although in the past this was certainly true, but there are many Muslims, especially today, who have no problem dying to defend Islam. And we all know that Islam is bullshit. It's not true. It's demonstrably false. But believing something is true so strongly that you're willing to die for it is completely irrelevant to whether it is actually true or not. This is the internal consistency versus external consistency thing again. In order to know something's true, you have to compare it to the real world. You can't just be consistent within yourself of believing it.
True, but doesn't that lend some support to cooperation? In other words, we don't just have one person who's deluded, who says, here's a cool story, I'm going to write it down, and I'm out there on a limb. We have a set of authors, different authors, who wrote, to some extent, independently, the Synoptic Gospels aside, but they wrote their letters, certainly independently. But Paul wrote the letters to the church at Thessalonica. He wrote that independently. He didn't copy that from somewhere. It's an original from whoever wrote it. So you've got different authors who are writing the same story. So then we're going to make the case that they are all deluded, and they are all deluded in exactly the same way?
Well, sure. That's part of what the definition of religion is that you have shared beliefs. A religion by definition, and there's so many ways to define religion. It's just not something that lexicographers and cultural anthropologists and religious studies professors agree on. But the definition that I think makes the most sense, the one that I use, comes from Craig Palmer and Lyle Steadman, who are anthropologists who wrote a book together called Supernatural and Natural Selection. And the definition that they use in that book says a shared belief in something faith-based. In other words, it can't just be one person that believes it, because that would just be a delusion. And it has to be something that you have to take on faith, that you can't just show somebody and convince them is true. They have to just believe you that what you're saying is true. So, by definition, if we're talking about a shared delusion, and they all believe roughly the same thing, that's what a religion is. But then
I'll take one step further, though. I'll be quiet here. But if we take this to modern day, if you look at people like leaders, in the Christian church, if you look at, or even evangelical, if you're looking at Jerry Falwell, if you're looking at Pat Robertson, if you're looking at, pick a name, the top 10 or top 20, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that these people are not just compartmentalizing at that level. These people know that this isn't true. They're making money. Okay, there's a motivation there. All right, and I'm going to hypothesize that if tomorrow their lives were at risk for doing this, that they would cease and desist pretty quickly. And so, the point being that I think that argument about religion and indoctrination and a shared mentality or shared story, I think that has validity within the confines of the masses that are attending or that are the followers. But I think even in that time, you obviously have people who were leaders. You have people who are a cut above the lot, if you will. And I find it hard to believe that they all had that shared belief. I find it hard to believe that they were not very much like the Jerry Falwells of our day, where they knew full well, possibly, that what they're writing wasn't true. And I find it hard to believe that they were all deluded. It seems more likely, given the level and given their leadership abilities, that they were. I think you could still make an argument that.
Yeah, I
it
think,
lends some credibility to what they're writing.
Yeah, I think some of them. I don't know how soon this started, but I think some of them surely knew it was bullshit. I mean, the people compiling the stuff and arguing about it and voting on it and trying to square differences in the different books, I mean, they were clearly aware of the contradictions. They were discussing them. At the very, very beginning of Christianity, nobody was making money off of this. This was an underground thing, and I mean, this whole persecution of Christians thing is extremely exaggerated, but at the very beginning of it, it wasn't like the Catholic Church is today, where the Pope leads a very comfortable life.
Right.
That came along a little bit later, when you started to see the establishment of roles like bishops and then later the papacy. Yeah, I mean, certainly people were aware that these things were arguably true or false, literally. But I think at some point, and I think probably this is true today too, that the majority of people who follow it actually think that it's factual and not just that they believe it because they're getting something.
But
like money out of it.
But that takes us back to the original question, though. Mm-hmm. If you agree that back in the first century that the people writing this were aware of the fact, if you're going to argue that they were aware of the fact that it was false, then
well, the
people writing it, the leaders. If you're going to argue that at least some of those were aware of the fact that this was all bullshit, then you have to explain why they would continue to do it in light of the fact that they were putting their lives at risk.
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. I don't think they necessarily thought it was all bullshit. I think they were trying to make it sound as plausible as they could, given that they believed a degree of it. Also, you have to weigh the risk versus the reward. And the people who wrote these books were not necessarily the same people who compiled them, because the compilation came later. Originally, these were all written by individual churches, and then it was only at a later time that they sent representatives to defend it when it was put into an anthology.
Right.
As far as the other point, it is risky, but there's a payoff too. And so when they thought that they would be able to get away with not getting killed for it, they wanted to express that they thought it was true, such that people would give them money for teaching them about it.
Okay, didn't mean to derail us here. On with the presentation.
Okay. So
One
on
word. Go for it.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying something else. All right. Our next question: did these source documents of the New Testament authors survive to the present unaltered and intact? Now, looking at this is the third branch of our what's it called? I'm trying to think of it. The fork-shaped. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So when we're looking at the question of is this reliable? First, we have to ask, were they in a position to write about these things accurately? Second, we have to ask, did they write about them accurately? And then the third one here, did those documents make it to us today without severe changes, substantive changes? So really quickly, I'm going to run through what lower criticism is, also called textual criticism. So we're talking about biblical autographs, that is the actual handwritten documents that these writers were writing on. As far as how many of those survive to the present day, absolutely none of them. None of them survive to the present. They all turned to dust a long time ago. All we have are copies, or more accurately, copies of copies. The oldest surviving fragment of any part of the canonical New Testament, any of it, comes from the John Rylands Library. It's called P52. It is about the size of a credit card. On the recto, that is the front side, it has a couple of verses from John 18, 31 through 33, and on the verso, it has 37 through 39, about 20 characters in Greek on each side. Really not much to work with. Again, as a reminder, John is the last of the 4 Gospels to be written in chronological order, somewhere around 95 to 110 or so. This is what it looks like. This is it. This is the entire New Testament that we have all the way until 125. That's what we're working with. We have pieced it back together with more since then, but we definitely do not have copies of these that we can compare the originals with, because we don't have the originals either, to see how accurate they are to what was actually written. Right. So as far as dating this, I'm going to skip a little bit to save time. The Hadrianic script dates it to the early part of the 2nd century. Paleographic evidence puts that around the same time, so taking those together, we're looking at about a century after Jesus died, so this is definitely a copy. As far as the oldest complete New Testament, that doesn't date until, like I was saying earlier, Sinaiticus Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, until the 4th century, about 300 years after Jesus died. As far as how many variations are in different copies of the New Testament that we have now we're talking about an extremely large period of time here, because we're talking about copies made from the first fragments that we have in 125 all the way up until the printing press was widely adopted in the 16th and 17th centuries. So in all of that time, 24,300 copies of these books. That's a lot of copies. That's a lot of room for errors. We have about 5,000 ancient copies of these books. So as far as variations between all these different copies, there are about 400,000 variations. Now, most of these don't matter. There are things like spelling differences. Spelling was not standardized back then the way it is today. And there are regional variations. We have this now. I mean, you know, the Roman Empire was quite large, and it's like things like spelling honor, like H-O-N-O-R versus H-O-N-O-U-R. It's the same word. We know that. It's not an error. It's just a difference. But it is a variation, and when there's a difference like that, sometimes we can figure out what it really says, and sometimes we can't. And sometimes it's quite different. It actually says a different thing versus just a spelling difference or something quite that simple. There are more variations by a factor of 2 than words in the New Testament. But like I said, a lot of them actually don't matter, so don't get too scared off by that. Okay, so really quickly, I'm just going to run through some examples of the type of textual errors that make all those variations a problem. There are 10 types of what are called involuntary copying errors. Now, I want to stress every single scribe did all of these. It's just not physically possible to copy documents all day, every day, and not make mistakes. If you've ever tried to retype a paper or something, you know, or write it out by hand, it's just, you're not going to have it 100% perfect. That's just not how humans work. So one example of this is called haplography. This is where you do 1 of a letter instead of 2 of a letter by accident. For example, in English, if you accidentally write down chose when the original document said choose, but your brain doesn't register, or your spell checker or whatever doesn't register that it's a mistake because it actually is a word. Ditography is the opposite, where you accidentally write down 2 letters instead of 1, like for example stoop when the original said stop. Metathesis is where you transpose letters or words. My favorite example of this I found is they said the
God and dog?
No, that's well, yeah. I mean, that's one example. But the one that I found that I liked the best was the bathroom door was magnificent, which is considerably different than the bathroom odor was magnificent. Okay. So fusion is combining 2 words Massacre versus massacre. That's a strange example because you would never have massacre written like that, but it is a real word in both cases. Fission is the opposite, canteen versus canteen. Homophony is when you have two scribes working together in tandem, and one is dictating and the other is writing down. And if it's a homophone, you can accidentally write down the wrong one. Like, for example, read with two E's versus read with an E and an A. Substitution, where you just write the wrong letter by accident, you're just not paying attention. You familiar with the backstory of how the game Pac-Man got its name?
No.
It's a great story.
I heard it, but I can't remember.
So originally, the game is called Puck-Man, not Pac-Man. And in American arcades, teenagers doing what teenagers do would take pocket knives and scratch out the middle of the top part of the P so it says fuck man, and pretty quickly there were requests to change the name, and the Japanese makers changed it from Puck-Man to Pac-Man, which is why it's named that now. So Homo eoteluton, which is a mouthful. This is a fun one. This is a mission due to adjacent passages sharing the same ending. Like, so for example, say you have, and this is a memory aid that you see a lot in poetic type of writing. Homer did this all the time. The entire Odyssey and Iliad are filled with this. A lot of ancient stuff is filled with this. But often, to sound more profound, people will, in writing, repeat specific lines. For example, you might have a paragraph where you end the paragraph with the sentence, and so it was. And then your next paragraph, you say something else, and then you end that paragraph with the sentence, and so it was. So what Homo eoteluton is when you are copying along as a scribe, you finish the first paragraph, reading it. Then you go to from your exemplar to your paper that you're writing on, and you copy it down. Then you look back at your exemplar to get the next bit, but you accidentally, instead of looking at the last line of that first paragraph, you look at the last line of that second paragraph, thinking that that's what you just copied, so then you skip to the next one. So you just skipped an entire passage, not involuntarily, because of that similarity. That happened not as regularly as things like haplography and so on, and substitutions, but often enough that it was a problem. Just accidentally omitting words. If you're just trying to remember too big of a chunk than your brain can really handle in working memory, that can happen. You can just skip over them. And then just memory errors. These scribes, I mean, if you were working 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, all day, your entire career, at some point you're going to memorize the whole thing. You just do. But like I was saying before, a lot of these books are substantially similar to one another. So if you are copying down, say Matthew, and to save time, or because you're impatient or whatever, you decide to do some of this from memory just to speed things up. And you're confident in yourself that you can do that because you've done this a lot, so you only refer back to your source document, your exemplar, occasionally. You can be unconsciously influenced, because of this familiarity with a similar passage, or from a different book entirely, like Luke, because they're pretty similar, and end up with a completely messed up document as a result of this.
Dave?
Yes.
Yeah, but looking at the list of 10, I mean, but again, if you have a sufficient number of documents after the fact, I mean, it would seem to me that all of those errors would be fairly easy to clean up.
Right, and almost all of them are, and that's what I was saying before about a substantial number of these 400,000 differences don't matter because we can tell what happened and it's not a big deal. But some of them are, and by the way, there are more than 10 types. These are just 10 that I picked out. Okay. There are lots of other ways that you can screw up a document, but there are also 4 types of, and this is where it gets a little trickier, 4 types of what are called voluntary copying errors, which is a little bit different. So a voluntary error, quote unquote, is when a scribe changes something with awareness that they are changing it. And there are a couple different ways that this can happen. And this is what we really have to watch out for, because we don't have the originals, so we can't compare and piece back together because we have nothing to compare it to. Bias is the main one. So you have a scriptorium, which is where a bunch of monks live and work and copy documents all day. And each scriptorium, as far as which church they worked for, which church they were a part of, which congregation, would have different theological teachings that fit in with what they wanted to say. So you might, like for example, and it doesn't necessarily just come from the leadership level. Scribes themselves often had multiple exemplars from which they could choose between to say something that they might have wanted to say, or not say something that they might not have wanted to say. Like for example, say you are gay and you have two exemplars and one of them is very harsh on homosexuality, the other one is less harsh. You might choose to copy the less harsh one because you don't want to perpetuate what the other one says. But the other one might be more accurate to the original. We have no idea if they didn't copy that one, so that's one way this can happen. Clarification. This is basically where you just add words to a hard passage or a vague passage to make it more clear what you're trying to say. You just keep adding on more and more until it's absolutely certain there's no question of really exactly what you mean, like I'm doing right now, and it just gets longer and longer. Part of the way that we tell if something has been clarified or not is how long it is. There's something I'll get to later called lectio brevior, which just means the shorter reading. If something is shorter or makes less sense, it's weirdly worded, that's a clue that is more original, more closer to the original than if it's not like that. We'll come back to that. Grammar and spelling. So in the ancient world, like I said, these things were spread out over very large geographical areas, crossing many different countries. They were all in Koine Greek, but they didn't have standardized spellings. And later, when Jerome was commissioned to write the Vulgate Bible, and you started doing this in Latin, over the centuries, Latin became Italian, and over time, these went through substantial changes in spelling and grammar. You started having things like punctuation inserted, lowercase letters, all sorts of things that did not exist in ancient Latin, in classical Latin. So, say you're copying something along and it sounds awful because this is not how people talk anymore. Like if we're reading a book, from the 1700s and it says Congress, but it's spelled C-O-N-G-R-E-F-S. Like we don't spell Congress that way anymore. So if you're copying this, you might do the document a quote-unquote favor and spell it correctly, quote-unquote, and that is a change to the original. That's not how it was written, but it makes sense. I mean, it's not necessarily wrong to do that if you're trying to make it a usable document. So those kinds of changes would happen too. Marginal notes. So these are especially fun. We don't have a lot of examples of these, but when they come up, it's very exciting because when there were multiple exemplars or a doctrinal disagreement between what it was supposed to say or how it was supposed to be taught, we don't necessarily know what the other versions said if they didn't copy them, and we don't have those. So what's nice about marginal notes is that they would annotate this to tell us what the other one said or what the disagreement was, which tells us, as far as scholars, a lot about the history of these documents themselves. So that's something that we look for that we really like. So this is a picture here from the Codex Vaticanus Graecus 1209. This is the end. You can see the initial there in between the first two columns, and then that green line is the top of the next book. This is the end of 2 Thessalonians there at the end of the first column. Middle column at the top is the beginning of Hebrews. And then we have between at the bottom of the middle column and the third column a margin note. It's circled. And that is right next to Hebrews 1:3, which says amesthete kaikike feston polion mi potopi, which is Koine Greek for jerk and stupid servant boy. Maintain the original wording and do not change it. So we don't actually know what the original there said, but we know that he changed something, and his boss was not happy about it. So that's the kind of thing that I mean, that's useful as a scholar to find something like that. If you're curious, that verse, Hebrews 1:3, says, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. So something about that is wrong, according to whatever original they were copying from. We don't know.
Yeah, and Dave, we actually have a question.
Sure.
From Twitter, Camila Harris asked, does this all go into the thought pattern and processes of I can't talk now. Process of how we got all these biblical versions and editions?
Yes, a lot of it is. A lot of it's just different translations when we're bringing them into modern languages. But yeah, we don't have. It's not like there is an original version that made it to us today. There are thousands and thousands of versions, and it just depends on which ones you want to piece together to get where you're going now. To say you're going to read it in its original, quote unquote, original Greek, I mean, there are thousands of them. It's not like you have to pick one if you're going to do that. They're all substantially similar, but it's not like we have one that is necessarily more accurate or more original than another one. There are versions that are more commonly used by seminaries than others, but just for consistency's sake. But yeah, it's not something that we can really say with any degree of certainty which ones are more accurate than other ones.
Dave?
Yes.
I've got I don't know if I can share it here or not. I was looking up some things earlier because other Dave let me know what that topic was here. But there's a website, and I do think it's from a Christian perspective, but it's on the historicity of the Bible, and it's a short paragraph that compares what we have in terms of documents for the New Testament versus what we have in terms of documents for some other pieces of literature from ancient history. Do you mind if I spit this out? It's about 3 paragraphs, so I'll go as quick as I can here.
Sure.
And then a question, of course. Okay, it says the important first-century document, The Jewish War by Jewish aristocrat and historian Josephus, survives in only 9 complete manuscripts dating from the 5th century. 4 centuries after they were written. Tacitus' Annals of Imperial Rome is one of the chief historical sources for the Roman world of New Testament times, yet surprisingly it survives in partial form in only 2 manuscripts dating from the Middle Ages. Thucydides' history survives in 8 copies. There are 10 copies of Caesar's Gallic Wars, 8 copies of Herodotus' history, and 7 copies of Plato, all dated over a millennium from the original. Homer's Iliad has the most impressive manuscript evidence for any secular work, with 647 existing copies. Bruce's comments put this discussion in perspective. No classical scholar would listen to an argument that the authenticity of Herodotus or Thucydides is in doubt because the earliest manuscripts of their works, which are of any use to us, are over 1,300 years later than the originals. For most documents of antiquity, only a handful of manuscripts exist, some facing a time gap of 800 to 2,000 years or more. Yet scholars are confident of reconstructing the originals with some significant degree of accuracy. In fact, virtually all of our knowledge of ancient history depends on documents like these. He says, by comparison with secular texts, the manuscript evidence for the New Testament is stunning. The most recent count, 1980, shows 5,366 separate Greek manuscripts represented by early fragments, codices, and minuscules. Among the nearly 3,000 minuscule fragments are 34 complete New Testaments dating from the 9th to the 15th century. Yeah, I'm trying to get this in perspective. So when are we saying basically that the other works of history are in a similar state of shambles, for lack of a better expression, or are we saying that the Bible, the New Testament of the Bible, is substantially less reliable than those other documents?
So there's 2 reasons that it doesn't really matter. Well, not that it doesn't matter, but that argument doesn't really work. So with respect to the Odyssey and the Iliad, as far as ancient Greek in general, it's kind of difficult to explain if you don't read Greek, but ancient Greek is extremely poetic. it doesn't rhyme because the endings change depending on where the word is being used in the sentence, but it has meter. And the way this works, if you wanted to make a change to a document like that, it would be extremely difficult. You would have to replace a word with another word that makes sense in the sentence, that fits the context, but also has the same meter in that it's the same number of syllables and that the stress is on the same syllables as the one you're replacing. So to change that, it would take an incredible amount of skill and conscious effort. It's not the kind of thing that you could do by accident. So that's one reason that, at least with the Greek ones, that this doesn't happen. And I'm talking about Homeric Greek, not Koine Greek. Koine means just common. It's a vulgar form of Greek that was used later on for purposes of lingua franca in the ancient world later on. But okay, so that's one thing, is that it's much more difficult to make those kinds of accidental changes to those documents. Secondly, it doesn't really matter, because nobody is claiming that the Odyssey and the Iliad are true stories. They do make some extremely extraordinary claims. I mean, as far as Odysseus going around for 10 years, and I mean all of the supernatural creatures that he deals with, but nobody believes that those are actually true. And when you're making an extraordinary claim, of course the famous phrase, it requires extraordinary evidence. If there were a religion based on the word-for-word accuracy of Caesar's war accounts, or on Tacitus, or whatever, then yes, it would matter. If people were trying to make public policy based on the word-for-word accuracy, meaning and intent of Suetonius or something, then it would matter a lot. But nobody's trying to do that. So they are trying to do that with the Bible, though, which doesn't make sense, because to say that you're even trying to do something word for word with the Bible is impossible. We don't have the word for word wording to do it.
But I mean,
yeah, only God has that.
But your second point, I'm not sure I'm entirely in agreement with, in that regardless of how people want to approach the work after it's been translated, or what we have now, I think what the point he was trying to make was that, given the large span of time from the originals in those documents, given the rather limited amount of source material, we still believe that we have reconstructed them in close, not perfect, but in close to original form. Because we have a high degree of confidence that we've done a good job and we're close to what the original said.
Yep.
So then, isn't that also true then biblically? Can we not say the same thing?
Yeah, I think it's quite. I think we can be quite confident that we have reconstructed the source documents of the Bible pretty accurately. It's certainly as accurately as many other ancient documents that we have fewer copies of. I mean, he's absolutely right about that. We should not be as confident about something we have fewer ancient copies of, especially if those copies are from a much later time. If we don't have something until the Middle Ages and it was written 1,500 years or 2,000 years before that, then yeah, we should question it. Definitely. And I think that we should be more confident in the accuracy between, and I'll be careful when I use the word accuracy. I'm talking about the preservation of the original wording in copies that we have from later.
And
I'm not talking not the historical accuracy, right?
Correct.
Not comparing what it says to what actually happened in reality, because we can't know that with nearly the degree of certainty that we can compare documents. Okay. So as far as how textual critics do this, how they reconstruct these autographs, there are a couple of ways that you can do this. One is to use external evidence, like for example, the age of the document helps us identify exactly where it belongs as far as who wrote it, as far as which document it's a part of, if we don't have enough going on it itself, if the script, the ink has faded enough that we can't tell or whatever. The age of the document itself can give us a clue. Papyri is, for example, was used before parchment was used before paper was used. If it's organic stuff, papyrus or parchment, parchment being made from animal skin, papyri being made from plants, then we can check the carbon content and age it that way. As far as paper, that just wasn't invented until quite a bit later, unless you were in China. So that's one way to date it. And then geography is another way. Just where we found it. Like, for example, the Roman Empire did not extend into certain areas until quite a bit later. So if we find a copy of the Bible, in England, then we know that this is a later copy than one that we found in Turkey or something. So that's one way to do it. As far as just a little side note, Emperor Hadrian, who we mentioned earlier, we were talking about Hadrianic script in the John Rylands Papyrus P52. I'm just going to take a second because this is really funny. So when Hadrian's army was advancing into England to take over there, they approached Scotland, and normally what they do, that's the Roman army, they take over. But the descriptions that we have at the time, personal correspondence and war journals, they describe these Scottish people as these fire-haired, vicious warriors. And instead of advancing, the Romans built a huge fucking wall. It just walled them off and retreated. And it's still there. It's called Hadrian's Wall, and it separates Scotland from England because they're like, we don't even want to mess with them. It just cracks me up. So, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And I mentioned this part earlier about internal evidence. Lectio brevior is just Latin for the shorter reading, and it just means that if something is written with fewer words, it is more likely to be an older copy of that document than one that is clarified with more words, because generally you add rather than subtract when you clarify. Similarly, lectio difficulor, if something makes less sense, if it's vague, if it's just a weirdly worded thing, it's more likely to be older, because when you quote unquote fix a document, you tend to make it make more sense. So as far as what lower critics do, this is what they start with. They look at something like this. I've done this in English so that it makes more sense for our purposes. But so in ancient Greek, there were no minuscule letters, and we would call it lowercase, but it just looked like that. There were no spaces, there was no punctuation. This is what it looks like, and it's illegible. I mean, you can't read this. So what a lower critic does is figure out which parts of what we're looking at are the current sentence as opposed to the preceding sentence and the sentence that comes after it, and they strip that away so that we're just looking at one sentence. So this is what we're left with. Now, this is starting to look like something we can read. This does not really make sense yet, but we can pick out some words in there. Like we can't tell. I mean, we see man, we see with, we see out, or we see man again, we see not. I mean, but it could be other words too, but it's starting to get there. So then what they do is they put in minuscule letters, they put in spaces, they put in punctuation, and then give it context so that it is an English sentence that we can actually read. So this is one way to do that. Woman without her man is nothing. So that's the sentence that we are left with. The interesting part about this, though, is that you are totally dependent on your ability to put this together from the context of the fragment that you have. If you don't have a lot to work with, you are extremely limited in what you can do as far as knowing what it actually is supposed to mean. For example, you could also do it this way: woman without her man is nothing. And it's a totally different sentence. It means something completely different, but it uses the exact same letters. So this is why what lower critics do is so important, and why we should seriously question the word-for-word accuracy of these documents as far as their intent. We can sort of figure it out from all sorts of different ways, but especially with the fragmentary stuff, it's not easy to do. What lower critics do is extremely important, and they have a lot of influence and power over the way that we read documents today. So that's just something to keep in mind. We should be very critical and very skeptical of what we're reading, because we really don't have a place to be confident in a lot of this stuff. So we talked before about the books that were not voted in, and just as a quick aside, I want to go over some of what's in there.
I think another note real quick is alongside the commas and the punctuation too, is keep in mind that the New Testament was not written with chapter and verse numbers.
Oh yeah, that's actually an extremely new addition to that. I want to say like 17 or 1800s even.
King
I can't
James,
remember.
yeah.
Yeah, it's quite recent that those were added in. Yeah, this cartoon cracks me up.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah.
So the funniest part about this cartoon, though, is that this is actually in there. So I'm not kidding. Okay, so this is from the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. Pseudo-Matthew is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that we found in the 1950s. Pseudo-Matthew, it's so called because it's basically a director's cut extended version of Matthew. It has some scenes that do not appear in the canonical version. So this is from chapter 18 of Matthew. This is Jesus when he was very young. It says, "And lo, suddenly there came forth from the cave many dragons, and when the children saw them, they cried out in great terror. Then Jesus went down from the bosom of his mother and stood on his feet before the dragons, and they adored Jesus and thereafter retired."
Oh, Dave, can you
Yes.
cut? No, other Dave. Dave, can you cut this out and edit this? I don't want the creationists telling us that this is proof that dinosaurs and Jesus roamed the earth together.
Well, it does say dragon, not.
Close enough.
I think that's a dramatic translation. But the important point, though, is that this was not included. They didn't vote this in, probably because it sounds insane. Unlike, of course, being born to a virgin, or changing water into wine, or walking on water, or rising from the dead, or a talking snake, yeah, and so on. Jesus takes pools of water very seriously. So this is from the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, which similarly was not included in the canon. And this is when. Okay, so the scene that's going on right here, Jesus was playing with a pool of water as a child with a stick. He was poking at this water with a stick and causing the water to come to life, to rise up as little figurines that started to dance with each other in the pool of water. And so what happened in this scene? In the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, another child walked up to Jesus and saw him doing this and kicked the water in Jesus' face, which is a really fucking stupid thing when you are talking to the king of the universe, okay? So it says here, this is Jesus talking back, "O evil, ungodly, and foolish one, what hurt do the pools and the water do thee? Behold, now also thou shalt be withered like a tree, and shalt not bear leaves, nor root, nor fruit, and straightway that lad withered up wholly."
Now, that's going to present a problem for the literalists, because I'm not sure that child would have bore leaves anyway. But, wow.
Well, Harold wasn't an actual literal fox either. I mean,
yeah. So, but these, like the Infancy Gospel and the Pseudo Matthew, do we know specifically that these were actually considered at the council when they were deciding on the 27 books, or did they just exist somewhere and we don't really know whether they were taken under consideration?
I know that there were certainly ancient Gospels that were not included that they were voted on and talked about. I do not know with certainty whether the Infancy Gospel, Thomas, and Pseudo-Matthew were included in those, but I think that Pseudo-Matthew was. I don't know about the other one.
Okay.
So this is from the same book. This is the next chapter. "Jesus was provoked and said unto him, Thou shalt not finish thy course. And immediately he fell down and died." So Jesus just killed a kid for kicking some water into his face. Really nice guy, huh?
Well, at least he didn't send bears to go kill an entire village.
She bears to kill 40 kids, right? Yeah, for making fun of Baldy Alicia. So, yeah. All right. So
He's
in
not
summary,
as bad as his dad.
Yep. So, to wrap this up here, when people are talking about we can rely on these books because they were written by eyewitnesses, because they were written so close to when Jesus was born or lived, whatever, except for 13. This should be 14. Except for 7 of the 14 Pauline epistles, we don't know who wrote these books. When we say 7, those are undisputed. That doesn't mean that he necessarily did write them, but we are confident that he did. But for all of the Gospels, for Acts, for Revelation, we don't know who wrote these books. They are untitled. They're anonymously written. All of that information was added on by committee vote centuries later. It's not reliable as a history book, or even making the claim that it's a history book, that it's an accurate representation of what happened. Unlike, for example, Josephus, who was at least telling us his purpose for writing was to record history, even though he also wrote some stuff that is really crazy and certainly wasn't accurate. Saul of Tarsus, who changed his name to Paul when he converted, like I said, wrote the undisputed epistles. He is our earliest New Testament author, starting in the 50s. He and Luke was his traveling companion, who also wrote Acts, both say they never met Jesus in the flesh. That is, while Jesus was still a man before he died and rose from the dead. They admit this. So if somebody tries to tell you again that these were written by eyewitnesses, these were written by people who knew Jesus, that is bullshit, and explicitly so in the New Testament. Virtually all New Testament scholars, including Christian New Testament scholars, agree that none of the 4 canonical Gospels were actually written by their traditional authors, that is, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. The apostles did not write the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. They were all written later by different people who had never met him, who were Greek-speaking, not Aramaic-speaking, not Hebrew-speaking. They were not Jewish. They were living in a community of Christians. They were not familiar with Jewish customs. They were certainly not familiar with landmarks in these areas that they were writing about. These were stories that they were recording, not first-person histories that they were capturing. Whoever he was, the author of Luke may have also actually written the book of Acts, which is part of the traditional authorship view of this. There is some extremely recent scholarship that strengthens this case, but this is still disputed. There are plenty of legitimate historians who do not think they were written by the same person. The author of Apocalypse was named John. He says so at the very beginning, first thing. It says he lives on the island of Patmos, but most modern scholars agree, the vast majority that is, that this person was not the same actual person as the one who wrote the Gospel according to John, although they were both produced in Syria by the Joanian community. So, as far as the New Testament goes, nope. Oh, yeah, there it is, and also 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, those books by the Joanian community. Our question here that we were talking about, the whole point of this presentation, did the New Testament authors in fact offer historically accurate testimony? The short answer is no. In fact, they contradict each other on some major points as far as extra-biblical history, that is, things outside the Bible. Like, for example, I'm going to kind of skip the reasoning behind these, but what day was Jesus crucified is 2 different days depending on which gospel you read. It's either the day of preparation according to John or the morning of Passover itself according to the synoptics. As far as what year Jesus was born, there was a 10-year gap between the earliest he could have been born, and I mean this on the high end, and the latest he could have been born, and I mean this on the low end. In other words, it says in Matthew that Jesus was born while Herod was the Roman client king of Judea. That is, Herod was in charge. The 3 wise men, astrologers from the east, came to pay tribute, and they came to Herod because he was the king, and they asked, for directions to whatever. And okay, so that story clearly happened while Herod was the king. Herod was the king until 4 BCE. In Luke, it says that Jesus was born while Quirinius was the governor of Syria. Quirinius was the governor of Syria beginning in 6 CE, 10 years later. The governorship system replaced the client king system. These do not overlap. They absolutely do not overlap. There is no way that these both could be true. One or both of those is incorrect. I mentioned this earlier. Was Jesus born in Mary and Joseph's house in Bethlehem, which is what Matthew says? When I say Matthew, of course, I mean whoever wrote the Gospel according to Matthew. Or according to Luke, did they travel 80 miles from their home in Nazareth and place baby Jesus in a livestock feed trough because the inn was full, which is what Luke says? When Jesus died, were there earthquakes strong enough to break bones? 2 of them, actually, not just the one. A supernatural darkness covering the sky, spontaneous tearing of the curtain of the Holy of Holies at the Jewish temple in Rome, or Jerusalem, excuse me, and a mass resurrection of Jewish holy men crawling out of their graves and appearing to many in the city. This is what happens when Jesus dies, according to the Gospel of John. This is absurd. This is if this happened, many historians would have mentioned it. By the way, the tearing of the curtain of the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is, it's okay in the Jewish temple. It's this set aside area where the high priest is the only person allowed in there, and he is only allowed there once a year on Yom Kippur. He goes in. He basically tries to seek forgiveness for his sins first, and then for the sins of the rest of the Jewish people immediately after that. If the curtain, this is the holiest place on the planet for Jewish people. If that curtain tore supernaturally on its own at the same moment that Jesus died, Jews would have absolutely recorded this. They would have very much had something to say about it. I mean, this is Mecca for Jews. There's no way that this could have actually happened and nobody mentioned it. It just wouldn't have happened. This is not true. This is bullshit. Okay. There are hundreds of examples of things like this that are just straight out contradictions, irreconcilable contradictions, things that do not match archaeological evidence. I just picked out a couple that I thought were humorous. There are so many of these. It's absurd to try to argue that what they wrote is historically accurate. It's physically impossible. So going back to our 3 questions then, were they in a position to offer reliable primary source testimony? No, they were writing decades after the fact in a language they didn't speak. They were not literate, so that makes it a little difficult. In a geographical area where they did not exist, and they didn't know the landmarks of this area or Jewish custom or Jewish law. It's very clear from reading what they were writing that they were not Jews. It's ridiculous to argue that these were primary sources. They just simply weren't. So then the next question, did these people in fact offer historical reliably accounts of what they were writing? No, they didn't. It just doesn't match history at all. I mean, as far as, like I was saying before, like archaeological evidence, anything extra biblical, it's just none of it matches up. And then as far as what they wrote, did that survive to us today? No. Better than many other ancient documents as far as our confidence in it, but there are substantial alterations. We cannot say with any real confidence that it's true to the original because we don't have the original. It's just it doesn't work as an argument to say that these are true. At best, I would call the New Testament historically inconclusive. I think that's extremely generous. I would call the New Testament historically inaccurate. But if you want to be unbiased about it, I would say historically inconclusive is extremely accurate. So wrapping this up here, the New Testament, I do think people should read it. It's worth studying. This is why I study it. It's a good book, set of books to read. It has some decent stuff in it. It doesn't have anything terribly original in it as far as philosophy or whatever. Love your enemies, turn the other cheek, be charitable, be honest. These are all things that predated Christianity by a very long time. The Bible has some really good poetry in it. Some of it's pretty disgusting. Song of Solomon is pretty badass. I mean, there's some good stuff in there that's worth reading. And I studied anthropology in school. I am fascinated by learning about ancient cultures and what was not just their language, which is also fascinating to me, but just the culture and the customs and the history that goes along with studying this stuff. But just like the Quran or the Upanishads or whatever other religious texts that we are considering here, these are not true stories, and they are demonstrably false. So read it as a work of literature. I mean, that's really the best way to approach it, because that's really what it is. There's some excellent examples of theological changes that I didn't really get time to get into, but don't take this book seriously. I mean, take it with a grain of salt, because it's not historically accurate, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And really, I encourage everybody, especially the people watching this who don't necessarily have a huge background in this stuff, read the Bible. It is the best book for making atheists, and I'm not just saying that because I want you to be an atheist, even though that is also true. If you are a Christian, you shouldn't really be objecting to reading the Bible either. And it's extremely effective at teaching you how ridiculous what Christians believe is. And I think it's useful in that regard. So thanks for listening, and if we have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Yeah, and again, I just want to put out there for everybody, if you have any questions, feel free to send them into the YouTube comment section, or send them to the hashtag Atheist Hangouts. There is a question, Dave, here. I'll take it off.
Let me shut off the screen share. And
by the way, Dave, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, happy to do it. Okay. Back on, maybe. Trying to get my. Oh, there I am.
There's Carl.
Yeah.
Am I? Oh, am I back up?
Yep, you're good.
All
you're
right.
Good.
Cool.
Question.
There might be people tweeting to us on Twitter. Also, let me see if I can pull that up.
Okay.
Because I think I'm actually set on our Facebook page to tweet at us. 1 second.
Yeah. The one on Hangouts there, Dave, is me. I just put that there as a note to you guys. It was an interesting book, and it's an excerpt from a book from a rabbinic scholar who makes the case that Jesus was probably a Pharisee, and that Paul never was, but was most likely a Sadducee, based on New Testament evidence and some external sources.
I hadn't heard that before. Who's the rabbinic scholar?
Link is on the right.
Okay.
I don't remember his name off the top of my head here.
David, here is Chris D's email. I just saw this because I was doing the presentation.
Chaim Maccoby.
Chaim Maccoby. Oh, okay. Alrighty.
I'm just combing through the Twitter feed to see if anybody tweeted at us with questions.
It was hard to have a question. You had a pretty comprehensive presentation.
Yeah, there was a lot of people that were tuning in saying, I came up with a question, but then he already answered it. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Andrew Lee, are you ready, Muscato?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. He said, you mentioned the Q document, but do you see there is more than speculative evidence of its existence? Is it referenced?
No, and we don't have a name for it either, which is why we just call it Q. But if you're serious about biblical scholarship, you kind of have to also learn German, because most of the serious scholarship of the last 200 years took place in Germany until much more recent times when Albert Schweitzer and those guys started writing. But it's we don't have it. We don't have really references to it. The reason that it's hypothesized is because so much of the stuff that's in Matthew and Luke, even though we don't have any evidence that they were collaborating with each other, matches each other verbatim. Some of that clearly comes from Mark, because it is in Mark, but a lot of the rest of it is also matching, and we don't know where that came from. And we, like I said, don't have evidence that they were working together. So it's likely that they were getting that stuff from another document, just like they borrowed from Mark for that part that matches. So that's why we think that there is this document Q, which we hope to find one day. I mean, we're still finding stuff all the time. Most of it's fragments, but sometimes, I mean, you know, just in the 1950s, we found a huge cache of stuff in a cave in which the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was, I mean, that kind of stuff happens from time to time, and who knows what we'll be able to find in the future, but I hope that it turns up.
Yeah. Oh, Carl, were you getting ready to say something?
No, not really. Except that you had mentioned in the beginning part of the presentation, you had mentioned that there are occasionally references within the 27 documents in the New Testament that actually reference external sources or quote external sources. And I've always found that to be an interesting problem, especially for the people that are, you know, verbal plenary inspiration. This is God's word. It has to be taken literally, because if you've got a reference to an external book, but the external book is not included in the canon, then either you're missing part of God's word, or something that was quoted in the New Testament as being from God or authored by God really isn't.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. Are you talking about when Jesus says, like, it is written that?
No. There's no, and I can't remember the exact. I don't have it with me, but I remember reading it in the past. God, I want to say it's in 1 2 Peter somewhere, that there is actually a quotation of a document, a named document, but it's not one of the 27 canonical books. And I don't have a reference for you. At the moment now. I can look a little bit here.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm getting stuff about Ender's Game. It's not what I meant at all. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I'm familiar with this.
I'll mute myself here and see if I can find it here real quick.
There was oh yeah, here he is. Actually, Chris did send in a question to you.
Oh, great.
He said details about the 5,000 evidences. Carl, I thought you muted yourself.
I did.
Well, I can hear you.
Oh, it's using my webcam instead of my microphone. Sorry. Gotta mute me there, would you?
All right, I'll mute you. Don't.
Thank you.
There we go.
All right.
I'll go back to details about the 5,000 evidences of the New Testament and it being more reliable than Homer's Odyssey.
Well, yes and no. Okay, so like I was saying, Homeric Greek, it's extremely poetic. It's in meter, and like I was saying, changing the wording of meter is unbelievably difficult. It's more set than even English poetry that rhymes, because it has to match not only the number of syllables, but the stress on each syllable, and it has to make sense in context. So to make a kind of error that is not an obvious error is very, very difficult to do in something like that. It's really poetry the way it's written. I mean, it's a story, but it's an epic poem. So it's unlikely that there are substantial changes to that. And even, I mean, technically, yes, we should be less confident about the word-for-word accuracy of that book because we have fewer copies and they're so far removed chronologically from when they were written. But because of what they are, because of how they're constructed, they are, I think, more trustworthy as far as the word-for-word accuracy of the originals than something like just a novel, which is basically what the New Testament is. The Gospels, at least, not the epistles. But there's really not a lot that would prevent you from changing quite a few of the details, quotations, order of scenes, that sort of thing in a novel without anybody noticing, or just changing a few words without anybody noticing. That is not true for poetry. That is especially not true for epic poems that have meter. So yeah, I mean, we should not be extremely, extremely confident that we have the word-for-word accurate documents of either of them. But in the specific case of documents written in metered form, I think that we can be more confident in those. That's not true of all ancient Greek stuff. If it's not written, if it's not poetry or lyrics or something like that, then it's just as susceptible to corruption as anything else.
Mm-hmm. Dave, yeah, here's the reference for you.
Okay.
Where'd it go? Here it is. It's in 2 Peter 2:4 and 2 Peter 3:13. It says that it references the Book of Enoch. Now, it doesn't do it. It does not do it by name, so I'm assuming it's a quotation from.
So, Book of Enoch, it's a Jewish book, and the great grandfather of Noah. It's not part of the actual Old Testament, but let's see. It's I actually don't know a whole lot about it. But yeah, I mean, if he was referencing that, he was assuming that this wasn't added later, which is just as possible. He was aware of its existence and its contents, I guess. I don't know. I mean, if we don't have that document, we can't really say with any degree of certainty whether it was legitimately from a god or not. I would.
No, I think
it is. But,
I think the point being that whoever wrote 2 Peter, or whoever, if it was Paul, I think the assumption there is if he quoted it, that he considered it canonical or divinely inspired. Therefore, if we don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, and there are probably lots of things that were divinely inspired that were not recorded too. I mean, we just don't really have. I don't believe that they were.
No.
But right, but. Yeah, not everything was necessarily written down. I don't know, or even if it was, not necessarily all of it survives or was included. It's hard to say. I mean, there's really no difference. I mean, when these committees were getting together to decide which books to include and which books not to include, Christians believe, most of them, the ones that tend to follow this sort of thing, believe that God was helping them decide which ones were truly supposed to be in there and which ones were not truly supposed to be in there. But I mean, they were just deciding. Unless you're already taking it on faith preemptively that God was part of this process, then how can we say that one that wasn't included wasn't supposed to be in there? I mean, they were doing it as they went along. So I don't think it. I think that they were just making it up as they went. I don't think God had anything to do with it because I don't believe there is one. But yeah, there's no real way to say which ones belong in there, which ones don't, because it was just a committee voting on it. It's not like there's some authority that says which ones do and which ones don't.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys ready for some more?
Sure.
Yeah, if you've got them. Yeah, sure.
They're actually, actually a bunch of them are coming in. Let's see. Anna, she asked, is Q thought to be a book of sayings? She said that's something I heard on the Reasonable Doubt cast.
I'm not really sure. I mean, we don't have this document. It's I mean, it's part of the oral tradition of the church. I don't know. I can't really say. I would love to see it if we ever find it, and then we can find out what's in it. But yeah, I mean, the stuff that appears in both Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark, which we therefore think came from this hypothetical Quill document, a lot of it is quotations as far as things that Jesus supposedly said. So in that case, then yeah, I suppose you could say hypothetically, speculatively, that it probably has a lot of quotations in it.
Mm-hmm. And it also goes along with like that. What's his name? It just made news that he had proof that Jesus was fake. They were saying there was like a lot of flaws in his arguments, and he really. What was I listening to? I was listening to another podcast, and they were saying, and then David Fitzgerald and Richard Carrier were just dissecting his arguments and saying it was he was off. Is that correct in their assumption? I know it's kind of a little off topic, but I know it's
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Joseph Atwill, right? This computer
yes,
scientist.
yeah. I couldn't
Yeah.
think of
I
his
mean,
name.
it's bullshit. I mean, I don't think any Bible scholar is taking that seriously. It's just not true.
I've heard that a lot, which is it's very very disheartening to hear that because here we are working so hard to hey we don't make claims, we have the evidence, we go with critical thinking, and then we have one that's just trying to, I mean, obviously it's a cash cow type of thing where he's selling out conferences and traveling with this information. It's like, just come on dude, do it the right way. I gotta get this out there too.
Nice. Cool.
Oh,
Black non-believers. Got a good time.
do it again, Dave. Sorry about that. I missed that.
Oh, here we go.
Black non-believers. Non-believers.
Yes, Jacksonville is very multicultural, so I'm going to start wearing this around. And I know in my group we don't have any black people, so I need to work on that. So, again, off topic, but I had to get that plug-in out there. Let's see. Questionable Adam. It was described as a global flood, but can we pinpoint perhaps which flood is referenced in Noah's Ark?
So I know, I mean, I've read it, but I know very little about the background of the Old Testament. It's just not something I've really studied. I'm sure that there are scholars who have speculated about which floods that might have been referring to, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, how many mythologies before Christianity? Well, I know there's at least a handful of them where they had the similar story of flood.
I think there was. I mean, I think you're right, and I think there's best comment I heard about this, and Dave, you're the anthropologist, but was that almost all cultures globally have somewhere in their mythology a flood story, and virtually all ancient cultures grew up around rivers and waterways, so it's not that surprising that the Bible includes a global flood as well, if you will.
And I don't know if I would agree with that. That most cultures have, as part of their mythology, a flood. At least, definitely not a worldwide flood. I mean, I don't know. There's more than one culture that has that, but it's definitely not.
It might have been a little hyperbole. Yeah. I don't know, but
yeah, I mean, it's definitely not common outside of the Tigris-Euphrates area. I think if you're talking about like South American or African cultures, I don't think that is really a part of their common story at all that I'm aware of.
Interesting. Okay.
Camille asked, Gospel of Judas and Gospel of Mary. Heard of them? Have anything on them?
So I mentioned this in the talk, that there are many Gospels that were not included in the canon. There's those are two of them. There's a Gospel of Mary Magdalene. There's a Gospel of Joseph. There's a bunch of them. These were for the most part pseudepigraphic. In other words, they were written by somebody else, and then a name was attached to them to give them credibility. They weren't really credible otherwise. They're just stories that have these names attached. So when you hear something like, the Gospel of Judas, this was not actually written by Judas. It has nothing to do with Judas. Somebody attached the name Judas to it in order to make it sound like it mattered. But yeah, I mean, it's just another ancient book that tries to tell another version of the story. We have lots of examples of those, and it's not really that. It's aside from a curiosity, it's not really that important to whether Jesus lived or questions about that kind of thing.
Carl, you have anything?
No, I don't.
What?
You got to give me something I disagree with.
I know you're a pretty good apologist. You don't like to agree.
No, well, but it was good information. It was good to hear and learn, though. But yeah, I'm more talkative when I disagree with somebody. If you want to invite G-Man on here with us, we'll bring the house down.
Yeah. Oh yeah, someone just. Yeah, that's what I really like about doing the screen share with this is being able to do the PowerPoint. Like, it's one thing to be able to talk about it. This is like what a lot of people miss by not going to the conferences is the PowerPoints. The PowerPoint presentations sell the speech most of the time.
It was really nice. I'm curious, Muscato.
Yeah.
American Atheists. Where does that fit in the conglomeration of other atheist organizations in the U.S.? Where does it fit globally? Where's it going? You're the PR guy.
So we are the hardcore group in the atheist movement.
The Bulldogs.
The Marines.
Yeah, and I just heard. Silverman's speech was all about that on Saturday.
He's a firebrand for sure, and I mean, I am too. We are very much the ones who say religion is dangerous, religion is a scam. It steals from people, it lies to people, it's wrong. We want it gone. We want to get rid of it. It is my goal to have fewer religious people in the world. I don't mean by hurting them or removing them that way. I mean just by convincing people that they should stop believing it because it's bullshit. As far as where we fit in, there's really kind of the two approaches to this sort of thing, discussing this sort of thing. There's confrontationalism and accommodationism. And accommodationism would be more working together with religious groups to do things like volunteer type of activities, and there's a place for that, and we have local groups, about 150 of them around the country, that do occasionally work with religious groups, but almost exclusively that's not really what we're about. We are about helping atheists come out of the closet, which means having a safe place for atheists, which means not having religious people at these meetings to judge them and disagree with them. A lot of what we're about is exposing religion for the lies that it tells and for how it deceives people and cheats people out of their money and stuff like that. We are pretty well focused on American issues. We are first and foremost a legal organization as far as advocacy for separation of religion and government and First Amendment public policy. But that's not all that we do by far. It's just the main thing that we do. We also have a goal of educating people about atheism. Along those lines, we have we have a couple of things. We have a library, a rare book library here at our headquarters in New Jersey. We have talks like this that we do. We go to conferences. We put on our own annual convention with 3 days of talks like this. We have a magazine that we publish. We have a couple hundred books. We have a press, and we publish a couple hundred books through that are available on our website, atheists.org, by the way, if you've never been there. We have a newsletter that we send out to our members, just lots of Facebook page, Twitter feed, lots of things about information about atheism, articles that we write for people who want to learn about this stuff, and a TV show called The Atheist Viewpoint that we produce once a week that also has a lot of information about atheism. So education is another big one. And then third one is community. And like I said, we have 150 local groups. A lot of times when people first become atheists, they feel very lonely. They might not even know that there's a word for atheists or that there are any other atheists out there who don't believe in God. Part of what our groups are for are to help those people be comfortable with calling themselves atheists, to coming out of the closet as atheists, to learning about atheism, exploring it. I mean, just because you stop believing in God and no longer believe, that the God created the universe in 6 days or whatever, that doesn't mean that you automatically know about the Big Bang Theory and about evolution and about, all the scientific stuff that replaces that for educated people. So part of what we do is help people get over that ignorance. I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but just to help people learn about all these things that they're behind on because they didn't learn them like they should have in the first place. So Yeah, that's pretty much what we do. But like I was saying, the main thing that we do is lawsuits. We try, of course, to resolve things amicably if we can. 99% of the time, I'm exaggerating, but a great deal of the time, people who are breaking the law, who are violating the Constitution, are unaware that that's what they're doing. And all we have to do is send them a letter and say, hey, what you're doing is unconstitutional, so you should cut it out. And they do, and it's no big deal. They apologize, and it's fine. Every once in a while, a government entity or whatever it is that's breaking the law tries to fight us on it, and they say, well, we don't really want to do this. And we say, well, you are violating the Constitution. We're going to sue you if you don't stop. And usually they will settle with us at that point. They will work out some solution where we don't have to sue. We don't like suing people. It's not like, I mean, I know that everybody thinks that we do, but it's expensive, it's time consuming, and we know that it makes us look like assholes. The thing is, we don't care. I mean, it's not that we want to look like assholes. It's that it's more important that the Constitution is followed than that we don't look like assholes. So we don't have a problem with that if it comes with the territory. So on the occasions that people want to fight us on it and don't want to settle, or we can't come to an agreement, then we will go to court. And we do that pretty regularly. We're going to court right now on a couple of things. And yeah, that's mainly what we do. We also care very much about things going on around the world, as far as, you know, Muslim-dominated countries and things, all sorts of terrible Catholic things in Africa. It's a mess out there. But as an organization, we don't really focus on that kind of thing because it's just a legal type of stuff. We do this under American law.
I certainly, just a curiosity, I guess, when you talk about separation of church and state, am I safe in assuming that you don't have a problem with people who have a religious background who want to petition the government to enact laws that are in agreement with their personal beliefs?
That they're allowed to petition the government if they want to, but I mean, they have a constitutional right to do that, which I respect and agree with. But the thing is, we should not, and it's unconstitutional too, make laws for purely religious reasons. If you are in favor of a law because it agrees with your religious beliefs and there is no secular purpose for it and it infringes on somebody's rights, that's not okay. If you are in favor of a position because there is a legitimate secular reason for it, that is logical, that is rational, that helps people, and it happens to agree with your religious beliefs, fine, that's great. I don't have a problem with that. But the real problem that we have is when somebody tries to enact policy that affects people who are not religious or who are outside of their religion on the basis of their religious beliefs. Like, for example, if you are against gay marriage, that's fine. You are welcome to have that belief. That is your right under the First Amendment. I'm not going to try to. I should slow down there. I guess I will. I am going to try to argue with you about that and talk you out of it. But I recognize your constitutional right to believe that. I think you're wrong, but that is your right. So if you are gay and you don't think gay marriage is correct, don't get married. That's your right. You can choose not to do that. What's not okay and what's unconstitutional is making a law that says gay people can't get married on the basis that you think God doesn't want that, because that is you forcing your religious beliefs on people who do not share your religion, and that's infringing on other people's rights. That's not what this country is about.
I don't know. Isn't there a line there though? Isn't there a line? I'm hesitant a little bit when you draw the line at their justification for what they want being the thing that makes it right or wrong. Should my justification matter? My personal justification? If I want a law that bans gay marriage, it shouldn't matter why I want it. When I want to make a law, making the law is simply, from my perspective, it would be simply, this is the society I want to live on. I've got a right to convince my lawmakers in Congress to generate a law that says X. My reasons for that, I would think, should be off the table.
Yes and no. If there's there's something called the Lemon Law that it basically looks at these types of things, and if there's no secular purpose for a law, or it creates unnecessary entanglement between religion and government, then you should not pass that law, even if you have a reason to do it. So your justification does matter in that you have to have a secular justification. You can also have a religious one, but there has to be some secular reason that you want a law passed, especially if you are infringing on someone else's right to do something. For example, I believe, and it has been interpreted by many states, not all of them yet, that part of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness includes the right to marry who you want to marry, and you are infringing on somebody's rights by telling them that they can't do that. If your purpose, I mean, it doesn't matter what your reason is. If you're telling somebody they can't marry who they want to marry, you are infringing on their right, unless you have a secular reason for that, which I've never heard even a remotely decent argument that was not based in religion for why gay people shouldn't get married. And I mean, there are a lot of other arguments too. This also applies to abortion. This also applies to birth control access, to a dozen other things. But I'm just using gay marriage as an example.
When I was against homosexuality in gay marriage, even though I was an atheist and a non-believer, I could never come up with a reason to other than I'm, you know,
right.
and then that's a really big. I was like looking in the mirror, saying, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are reasons, but they're fallacious.
Yeah,
they're like, you know, it's not traditional, it's not natural, blah blah. But of course, you know, those are specific fallacies. But yeah, I have never heard a secular reason that is not fallacious for why gay people, why we shouldn't have marriage equality. It's just there isn't one. The only argument that's not fallacious is religious, and that is unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good point.
And you guys might be having something gearing up pretty big here in Alabama here shortly, huh?
Yes. So what's going on in Alabama? This is in Montgomery, the capital. This is not a small town. This is 200,000 people. There's something called it's not actually called Cops for Christ, although I think that's hilarious. It's called Good Shepherd, Operation Good Shepherd. So what this is they have these volunteer pastors. I think there's 37 of them who have gone through this training program that allows them to basically minister to people at crime scenes. Minister to victims. So what happens is they ride along with the police officers, they arrive at a scene, and then they counsel victims of crimes. The purpose for this, in statements that they have made to media, is to spread Christianity. While people's guard is down, while they are victimized, while they're in a position of being more open to this sort of thing. And I mean, that's sick. I mean, to try to use that opportunity. He actually, the police chaplain called it, if I remember his wording correctly, an evangelistic opportunity. Yeah, I think that's what he called it. While these people are suffering, basically, to try to feed Christ into them. And yeah, that's not appropriate. I mean, if somebody was just the victim of a crime, that's the last thing that they need. And yeah, so it's a separation of church and state issue in that this is an official police function. It's also a financial issue as far as mixing tax money with religion, in that even though they are volunteer pastors, the training program takes tax money. They have on-duty police officers who get paid their normal wages by the hour to go through this 8-week program. I think it's 8 weeks. Yeah, so you can't use tax money for something like that for religious purposes like that. And also, right now, the program, ostensibly it's open to people of any religion, but in practice and the way that it's set up and the way that they put it together, only Protestant Christians are these pastors. It's the purpose of it is Christianity. It's spreading Christianity. It's not just having somebody available. Yeah, so on First Amendment grounds, you can't have mixing religion and government as far as the money issue. And on 14th Amendment grounds, as far as equal protection, they have to allow, if they're going to continue the program at all, they have to allow humanist chaplains and rabbis and imams and anybody else that wants to volunteer. They have to make them available on a equally rotating schedule or whatever.
Okay. Two schools of thought, I guess. Tax exemptions for religious organizations. Some people like it because even though it gives them a tax break, it keeps them out of the political arena officially. Other people would like to see it go away and see churches pay taxes.
I will comment on that immediately.
Okay.
I will say that. Yeah, I was, of course, before I was all for churches being taxed, but the fact of the matter is, and now knowing the laws, and I would much rather them not be taxed, so they cannot, because the way that our laws are stated, they can't lobby us, they can't, and that's exactly why the IRS is being sued right now by American Atheists and FFRF, because
our suit is actually about something a little bit different. I don't know what FFRF's is.
Oh, I know FFRF actually has 3 lawsuits on the IRS.
Okay. Ours is actually about the 990 form. It has to do with equality as far as the standards for what you have to do to get nonprofit status as a church versus what you have to do to get nonprofit status as a non-religious nonprofit. So there's this form called 990. It is not a single piece of paper. This form, it takes a couple of 100 hours to fill out. It's enormously time-consuming and expensive to do. It has to be done every year, and it includes all sorts of information that it's basically like if you have a major donor, all the information that they would want as far as like where are you spending your money, how much did you take in, what do you pay your staff, I mean all that kind of stuff. It's all of this, and the IRS gets it. They call for this document and they have a right to receive this information because they're giving us tax breaks. It's not a subsidy or anything, but we are tax exempt and donations to us are tax deductible and so on. The purpose of that is ostensibly nonprofits fulfill some kind of public good, some kind of benefit to the community. And basically the thinking is the government would normally be spending money on a social program of some kind, but because this private organization is taking on that responsibility on behalf of the community instead of the government spending money doing it, that it's acceptable and reasonable to exempt them from taxes because they're saving the government money. So in that understanding, they have to prove that they are doing something beneficial to the community, and that they are being efficient with their money and that they are being honest about what they're doing with it. So in other words, we provide to the IRS how much money we make as far as donations that we take in, where we spend our money as far as where it goes. If you want to know how much I make for a living, my salary, it's public record. You can go look it up at the IRS's website. That's true for all American Atheist staff and every single nonprofit employee in the country. This is information that people have a right to know if they're going to donate to us and if we're going to get tax exempt status. The reason we're suing the IRS is that churches do not have to do this. Right. They don't have to fill out a 990. They don't have to disclose how much money they take in. They don't have to disclose how much money they actually spend on legitimately charitable purposes, which is the whole point of getting nonprofit status. They don't have to say how much they're paying their pastors, which in some cases is a huge amount of money. I mean, these people have private jets and $1 million houses and drive Rolls Royces or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous, and it's a scam. They are scamming people out of money, and it's being supported by taxes. It's just ridiculous. How
did this exclusion to filling out the 990s and being open about their income, how did that come about?
Just preferential treatment for churches in the first place. They've always had Christian privilege in this country since the very beginning, and it's really only been later on. I mean, when nonprofits became a thing in the first place, the government set up what they would require in order to give this status to nonprofits. there wasn't such a thing as a non-church, non-profit when they started collecting taxes in the first place, hundreds of years ago.
Okay. Any ideas how that's going to go? Do you think that's going to end up being changed at some point?
I mean, it better be.
Well,
Let me put it this way. We don't ever spend our donors' money to go to court unless we feel confident that we will win. I mean, we have a limited amount of money that we have to spend, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to our donors to spend it as wisely as possible. Some people question how we choose what cases we pursue. I mean, the bottom line is, what case do we think we can win? It's about setting precedent, changing the law, making the country a better place for atheists, and getting rid of discrimination. So sometimes people don't understand why, like, say that there's some issue that seems really egregious, that somebody is blatantly violating the Constitution, and they're like, why are you not going after this case, and instead you're going after something that seems pretty minor? The reason is we have better evidence for that. It's a more clear-cut violation of the Constitution. Precedent might be better for that one. Whatever circuit we're in might have, judges that are more favorable to one position than the other. Those sorts of reasons play into it as far as our investment in pursuing it. So yeah, I'm not an attorney. I'm just the public relations guy. But we would not be doing this if we weren't confident that we could win it.
okay.
So that's why everyone needs to become a member of American Atheists.
Yep.
And go to the conference in Utah.
Yes, exactly.
It's in Utah. Tell me, it's in Salt Lake, right?
It is in Salt Lake City. We haven't been to Salt Lake since 1981, so we're really excited to go back there. Since '81, I mean, obviously many things have changed. There's a huge surge of ex-Mormons in Utah now that we're not out of the closet the way they were back then. But there are still so many more who are in the closet, and not just Mormons, of course, but religious people all over. But part of what we want to do is help people understand that they can come out, that it's okay to do this. It's scary at first. You might lose friends. I mean, it's not.
You will.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you don't. I mean, sometimes, your friend or your wife or whoever tells you, I didn't want to say anything, but I'm an atheist too. I mean, that actually does happen. But yeah, but I mean, we get letters and emails and phone calls from people who have lost their children, who have been kicked out of their houses, who have lost all financial support from their parents and have to drop out of school because they need a job because parents found out they're atheists or whatever. It does happen, and it's horrible, and it makes me so angry and sad at the same time when I hear about somebody who's supposed to love you choosing their delusion, choosing their religious belief over their family. I mean, you're supposed to be able to count on your family. It's very unjust. But in any case, we want to help those people. We want to show those people specifically that this whole identity as ex-Mormon is not something that really should exist. I mean, if you don't believe in God anymore, you don't have to continue identifying with this community that you're no longer a part of.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not a Mormon anymore, if you don't believe in God, call yourself an atheist, identify as an atheist, come out, be part of us. It's not just that you're no longer a Mormon. You can join our community, and there are all these people here who are ready to help you, who are waiting for you to come out, who are happy to have you join us and be part of this whole scene. With conferences and with, I mean, it's great. It's a lot of fun. I mean, all these people in the atheist movement have a terrific time. We're all friends, and it's great. I want more people to be part of it.
Like going to the conference in Florida, it was like going to a family reunion. I mean,
yeah, that's a really great way to put it. I mean, I go to a lot of these, because I give presentations and stuff. But even before I worked at American Atheists, it was my favorite thing to do was go to conferences. I mean, I looked forward to them for months, These are people, I mean, I talk to them online all the time, but I only see them, 2 or 3 times a year. And they're some of my best friends. They're wonderful people. And it's especially if you live in an area where there are not a lot of atheists. To be in a room with 1,000 atheists is an unbelievable feeling. That to know that you can be honest with yourself and be honest with the people around you without judgment. It's just amazing. Yeah, I remember the first time I went to an atheist conference. I was actually still a professional worship musician at the time. A few people knew that I was an atheist, but I up until that point, I wasn't really. I was part of an atheist group, and I was aware of the existence of more atheists than myself. But the group had 5 people in it, and when I went to this conference, there were 400 people there, and it blew my mind that there were that many atheists in Springfield, Missouri. It just I couldn't believe it. And I mean, that was the day that I realized that I could come out and that I wouldn't be alone if I did that.
Dave, I know when you said it was like a family reunion, I'm not sure that for everybody that evokes the best imagery.
Yeah. But it's like a family reunion with family that likes you.
Yeah.
But there's a group, just out of curiosity, and I think Dave and I have talked about it before, called Secular Humanistic Judaism. And what they've effectively done is they have taken the Jewish religion, but they have jettisoned belief in the supernatural and in God, and instead, while they maintain all the same holidays and all the same traditions, they have revamped them to be more the story of the Jewish people and how they got to be who they are and how they got to be where they are. And there's still a very tight sense of community and of service to the community. And the reason I bring that up is I wonder if sometimes we in our zeal to get people out from under the yoke of an oppressive religious mentality, that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that the churches do or can provide a valid service to the community, that there is something to be said for whether it's a place to socialize, whether it's a place for comfort, whether it's a place for support, a whole wide array of services. Do you feel that we're going down that road sometimes? That we're trying to get rid of the whole thing, and is there not another path where we could help? Not that they necessarily want it, I guess, but where we could help churches to try and jettison the Bronze Age mythology pieces of this and revamp their belief systems so that they're more in accord with what we know and how we live today?
Sure. I mean, I have no doubt that churches on occasion accomplish things that are beneficial to people. But the important point is that there's nothing that these churches do that is beneficial to people that people aren't doing. I mean, it's the people that are doing it. It's not. Yeah, there's nothing supernatural about that.
Well, but yes, it's the people that are. I agree with you. It's the people that are doing it, and I'm obviously an atheist too, but I think that for a lot of those people, especially when you start talking about the elderly or people that have been in this their whole life, even though there are other people doing it, some of that benefit, I think, derives from their internal belief system. And I think for some of them, without that, they would not get the same benefit, even though it's still another human being trying to help them. I'm not sure I articulated that very well, but...
No, I don't think...
I think it is true that some people think, erroneously, that faith is a good thing, that it gives you hope, that believing something, even if it isn't true, is a positive thing. And for some people, it might be a positive thing for them, but I value what's true more than what makes me feel good. And part of what makes me feel good is being confident that what I believe is true. And I think it would be an ideal situation, and I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to advocate for and try for, to help people realize that they can jettison these religious aspects of all that they're doing while keeping the stuff that they want to keep doing. And like I was saying, that's why we have these local groups for support for that kind of thing, because I mean, we're humans are social animals. We do better in groups. We actually suffer physically if we're not part of a group. If, you know, we are built to work together in that way. So I definitely am not trying to say that we should just disband all churches and be done with it. What we need to disband is this. I mean, disband is not the word for it, but we need to get rid of is this idea that that faith in supernatural things and the positive side of churches or the existence of churches at all are linked. You can have one without the other. There are plenty of people who do not attend church, who have nothing to do with churches, who believe in God and are religious, and similarly, there are a lot of people who attend church who are atheists, but they do it because they like the social safety net and all the you know, being around their friends and so on. Those people, I mean, I would like everybody to be like that. It's totally fine with me if people want to go to church, if they want to listen to music, if they want to have, you know, rituals and ceremonies and things, which are also a part of the human experience, and I totally agree with that. But we don't need to throw you know, be so open-minded that our brains fall out, to quote Richard Dawkins, in order to achieve all of those things and to have all the good stuff that comes with it. I think this is something that we're moving toward. I'm personally not really that involved with these Sunday assembly things that are popping up. I'm familiar with them. I've been to a couple of them, but kind of the idea behind that, media calls it atheist church because it communicates immediately what it is, but they've been calling it Sunday assembly as a self-identity because they don't want to be called a church. But that's the same thing. I mean, it's music. It's joining together with people that you care about and you like, and meeting people who are like you, who think the same types of things that you do and see the world in the same way. And hearing interesting lectures by good speakers. The one that I went to here, there's a Sunday assembly in New York City. The one that I went to, Matthew Chapman was the speaker that day, the great-grandson of Charles Darwin. And I mean, that was awesome, getting to meet him and hear him speak. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I would be happy to do, and there's nothing supernatural about that. I do think if we dump that we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm suggesting that we dump the myth part.
What about the people that are? What about the people that are the moderates? It's easy to pick on the evangelicals, the ultra-conservatives, but the guy that's, you know, a Methodist or a Lutheran, goes to church his whole life. Does he believe it? I don't know. Probably in the back of his head, he hopes that it would be true. He thinks that it would be nice. But he's not making policy about it. It doesn't change the way he deals with science or deals with the world around him. It doesn't change his politics or his social issues even. It's something that he does. It's something that he's done his whole life. What's the danger? Where's the harm?
The harm with moderate religion is that it paves it paves the way for extremism and fundamentalism.
That's their problem, though, isn't it? Not. I mean, the moderate could say that's not my problem. That somebody else takes it the wrong way. That's. Well, I still have a right to my moderacy.
A moderate person is in no position to speak out against an extremist unless they're going to be a hypocrite about it. If you use the same book and you believe the same things, except you don't do what the book says, and the extremist does, I mean, that makes you a worse religious person.
Right, but they don't. But the point is, yeah, it does. But they don't really. I think the point is that they don't really believe it. Not the way that not the way that the extremist pretends to believe it or is deluded into believing it. The moderate, it's just part of what's the word I'm looking for here? Process isn't the right word, but it's just part of his culture. It's part of his heritage, but it's not something that he really believes. So I think that they would still speak out against the terrorist.
Right, but I think, I mean, I think it's hollow when you speak out against a religious terrorist on the grounds that they are using faith inappropriately. If you are willing to say that faith is an acceptable justification for why you're doing something, then anything goes. I mean, there's nothing that you can't justify if you are accepting the proposition that faith is enough of a reason to believe something, then there's no reason that you could not similarly use that to believe something bad. There's no guarantee that you're going to only use this to believe good things. And it's extremely potentially dangerous to open that door, to say that faith is acceptable, because I mean it's demonstrably wrong. There's no evidence for these things, for one thing. And if you value truth, which I do and reasonable people do, then you should stop right there and be done with it. But even besides that, faith is dangerous. To paraphrase Dan Barker, it's intellectual bankruptcy. If the only way that you can accept a proposition is by faith, you are admitting that you don't have reasons to believe it, that it cannot be believed on its merits, and that's wrong. That's not how we should look at the world. And the problem with that is that faith, it stops conversations. When you have two options of violence or discussion, and you are not willing to budge on what you believe because it's not evidence-based, it moves toward violence. It justifies violence. And this is not something that I'm okay with. It can either justify it directly in terms of, if you're talking to a terrorist, or justify it indirectly in that you believe the same religion that terrorists do, and you're not in a position to speak out against them.
But I think that presumes to some extent that if your reasons are not faith-based, that somehow you're going to be more amenable to listening to argument from somebody else just based on its logical merit. And I don't think a lot of us are that honest about it. I think even though we may not be exercising religious faith, I think obviously we all believe that at any given point the opinions that we hold are correct, and that they're logical, and that they're rational. And just because you come to me and you disagree and you have a different set of logical propositions to offer me, or reasons why I shouldn't change, doesn't mean I'm going to be any more likely to change than the person who's doing it for religious faith basis, or a faith-based reason.
I disagree. I mean, if you are properly, if you really understand what you're saying when you say that I'm basing my beliefs on evidence and logic, the application of logic to the evidence, and you understand epistemology, and you understand statistical probability and all the things that play into that, your confidence, confidence in the statistical probability, technical,
yeah.
Right? Your confidence level drops accordingly. You are more willing to admit that you're wrong, and less willing to push what you're saying is true to the point of violence, than somebody who says, I believe this based on faith. And by the way, the more I believe it despite evidence to the contrary, the more virtuous I am, because that's what faith is.
But I think, well, and again, we may disagree, we may actually not, I'm not sure, but I just think it's a very nice view of humanity. I'm not sure it rings true with how people actually live. I find it hard to give people that much credit, even though they say that's the basis for their arguments or basis for what they believe. On any particular case, I think people are fairly dogmatic, whether faith is involved or not. I think people tend to believe that they are right, and they tend to not want to change, regardless of whether they come from a religious background or they don't.
I think, everybody's irrational in at least a couple of ways. It's just humans. We try. We're not Vulcans. We try to be rational. We try to be as rational as we can.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some people are more skilled at it than other people. It is something that you can practice. It is something that you can get better at. If you read, websites like Less Wrong, it has specific advice for how to do these things and examining situations to help you do it better. But I think it's just something that we need to accept, just as a matter of being realistic, that we are all going to make mistakes as far as being as rational as possible, and or excuse me, as far as being rational, being as rational as possible means making mistakes, or you're not going to be able to do it perfectly. Some people, as rational as they can be, does not include being rational about religion. They're just gonna. That's one of the things that they fail on. For other people, they're able to see through that, and they see that that's not rational, and they are atheists. I am not rational about certain things. I'm a workaholic. I know it's not healthy. I know that I should not do that, but it's not something I'm rational about, and I'm aware of this. There are plenty of, phobias. That's the definition of a phobia, is an irrational fear disproportionate to the actual danger. Lots and lots of people have those.
Why would you choose as okay? If I can backtrack just a half a statement, we'll pick on you a little bit. So,
okay.
if you know that being a workaholic is irrational, and you're aware of the fact that it's irrational, why do you continue to do it?
Because it's a matter of guilt about not being able to help more people and accomplishing more as an activist. I get a lot of messages from people who need what we do, whose lives depend on what we do, and sometimes literally. And I cannot sleep at night if I haven't helped as many people as I can in a 24-hour period. And it's not something that I can let go very easily. And I know that, I am ineffective at helping people when I haven't slept and I've been working for 15 hours. But it's just, I want religion gone, and I feel like I'm just, I don't know. It's not rational. I don't know if I have an explanation for it.
No, but I think I didn't mean to put you into a corner there.
It's fine. No, it's okay.
I think that's you're making the point that I was trying to make before, that even when somebody has jettisoned religion, and even when they have a lifestyle which is premised on being logical and rational, they are still going to be human. They are still going to do things that are irrational. Even if they are aware of them being irrational, they're not going to change because they don't want to change, not because there's not a logical argument for them to change, but simply because they don't want to, for whatever their personal reasons are. And so I wonder how much change will occur in society, even if you were to get everybody away from religion tomorrow, because I think that part of human nature is still going to be present with with most people in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, well, I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, even without religion, I was never religious. But like I said, I was very, very racist, very homophobic, very arrogant. I was always a non-believer. So the whole religion aspect was never there. It was just I, as a person, learned and changed, and so the religion had nothing to do with why I believed the way I did at all, because even then I was raised in a secular home. It was not a religious home. I wasn't indoctrinated into anything. It was just what was around me, and it was my own arrogance, and I changed because I wanted to change. Not all humans want to change. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and it's unfortunate, but I think things are getting better. I think with things like the internet and with things like just general more cultural awareness, people, these barriers that separated groups of people are becoming less of a thing. I mean, you have people, who are 7 years old, who can use an iPhone better than I can, and you can't tell these people something that's not true anymore and expect them to buy it the way you could tell a 7-year-old when I was 7 something that wasn't true and I would buy it, because they can check on Wikipedia and they can see that you're wrong immediately. And I mean, you can't. We're no longer. You can't go backwards technologically like that. We're at the point now, and it will be true forever now going forward. We're at the point now where you cannot just lie to people, and because of because of things like travel more and exposure to other cultures and stuff. I mean, it used to be that airplane travel was extremely expensive and it was very slow, and only business people could afford to do it. And you know, if you wanted to experience another culture, it was a once in a lifetime thing. But now, it's just not true. I mean, you can experience another culture as much as you want, to some extent at least. And part of what's necessary for indoctrination is isolation. If you are exposed, especially as a young person, to different cultures, you immediately will start to question whether your own view of the world is correct, because you're comparing it to what other people see, and you realize that you don't have any better reasons for thinking what you think than that they have for thinking what they think, and you don't think the same thing. So if you can get that through to somebody at a young age, I think these things are going to be better in the future than they have been in the past. And that's what we're seeing too. We're seeing less racism. We're seeing less, or fewer, I should say, hate crimes for this type of stuff. Interracial marriage is, I mean, that used to be a big deal. Nobody cares now. I mean, some people in certain areas of the country are uncomfortable with it, but like, you know, the vast majority, if not the consensus of 10-year-olds, if you ask them, if you show them like a TV commercial of and in the commercial is a couple that's racially mixed, and you ask them, you know, what's wrong with this commercial, they'd be like, what do you mean? It wouldn't even occur to them to think about that.
And you bring up a good point. I don't mean to cut you off, Dave, but like,
it's fine.
The Cheerios commercial that made
that's
news.
Exactly what I was thinking of when I said that.
That made huge news. When I saw that commercial, when I saw it, it never once dawned on me. And then the minute the
commercial.
Yeah, there was a Cheerios commercial where a mother is having breakfast with her daughter, and the mother was white and the daughter was mixed or lighter skin, or you know what I'm trying to say. It's 12:30 here, so bear with me. And they're talking about Cheerios are good for your dad's hearts and everything like that. And then the next, you see the little girl thinking, and she walks off. Well, then the next scene, the dad's sleeping on the couch, and he's an African American, and the daughter had poured Cheerios on his chest. The Cheerios are good for his heart.
Oh.
That's the commercial.
Oh, okay.
Never once did it even occur to me until the news came out, and like people were offended that there was an interracial couple. I'm like,
well, you know what bothers the heck out of me? I mean, it's the same thing, but I used to love watching All in the Family. I used to love watching Jackie Gleason and the Honeymooners. I can't watch that now without, you know, the skin on my arms, you know, like somebody's dragging their nails across the blackboard. Just, you know, some of the horrible racist things that get said, the misogynistic things that get said. So I mean, our sensibilities, no doubt, they've changed over the years.
Mm-hmm. And you know, another thing I noticed too, and is like, and I did pick up on this, is watching American television, and then because I've been on a Doctor Who kick, I've been catching up on Doctor Who.
Hey, me too. Cool.
I did notice in Doctor Who they do have a lot of interracial couples in the show, and you don't see that in the American programming as much. But and we also know that, you know.
Well, here's the thing, and it's not a fair question. I'm really just making.
You're just being you at this point.
I am, being me at this point. But here's the thing, the churches realize.
Carl, Camellia put up the commercial for you.
Oh, thank you.
I'll retweet it.
Here's the thing, the churches realize, I think, that their future is based on indoctrinating children, plain and simple. Okay, their current parishioners are going to die out, and if they don't get to the children when they're young, especially, you know, again, as atheists become more and more active, they're not going to get them at all. How do atheists respond strategically to that? Do we become the people we hate and start indoctrinating children the other way? Is it indoctrination if it's the truth?
It's, well, I think the answer is that it's not indoctrination if you are not telling them what to believe, but you are encouraging critical thinking. It's kind of like was that Lovecraft who said that, or Mencken?
That
He
quote.
said,
Yeah. Don't
yeah.
teach your child what to think. Teach them how to think.
No, it was similar though. His point was, if your religion were really true, you would not. I'm paraphrasing. You wouldn't be so worried about teaching them what to think. You would just insist that they seek out the truth, and you would trust that they would end up your religion if your religion was really the best fit to the evidence. But encouraging your kids to explore the evidence and question and research and find out for themselves. Only atheist parents do that. And I'm, of course, exaggerating because there are religious parents who do that too. But teaching critical thinking is something that we are known for that makes us different. And if you teach somebody how to think critically, not what to think, that's the definition of that's the antithesis of dogma.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how does atheism, outside of parents who are atheists who teach their own children, how can atheists as an organization, as a group, reach children of religious parents? In other words, is there something to be said for opening critical thinking skills classes that are open to the public? Is there a way to reach them when they're in a household that's very religious?
I would love to see, and I know there are so many problems with public schools already that putting one more thing on their plate is not going to happen anytime soon. But I think teaching a class on critical thinking to younger kids, or even at the high school level, would be so valuable. Frankly, like, I never use anything beyond basic algebra, math-wise, ever. It's not necessary for what I do in a day-to-day basis. Anything more complicated than that, I hire a tax person to do it for me. So, but yeah, I can calculate a tip. I can, that kind of stuff. But
right.
Beyond that, I don't need it. Something that would have been much more valuable to me in 8th grade or whatever would have been a class on logic and critical thinking. And I saw a study about this once, and I don't remember where, or I would love to give you guys the reference, but there was some study where they asked a bunch of college professors, what if you had, pick one thing or rate these in priority or whatever it was, that you think is the most important thing for undergraduate students to leave college with. And some of them said, the options were things like, improve social skills, improve studying skills, knowledge in this area, knowledge in X area, whatever. The one learning how to think critically, like 90-something% of college professors said that was the number one thing that they hoped undergrads would learn from their undergraduate 4 years, was learning how to think critically. Because once you know how to do that, you can learn anything. You can be whatever you want. And like I was saying before, really, it's only really people who are secure in that what they believe is accurate who will encourage young people to think critically. Because if you are depending on people not questioning what you believe or what you're teaching them in order for them to buy it, you are not going to teach them how to question.
Is thinking critically, though, is an open-ended question here, but is thinking critically a skill or an ability similar to music, similar to dance? Is it something that can be taught to somebody that doesn't have already a natural aptitude for it?
I think there are people who are naturally more curious and more inquisitive. That's certainly a personality trait. But anybody can be taught logical fallacies. Anybody can be taught. I used to be a guitar teacher. You can teach anybody how to do it. Some people are tone deaf and they will never be good at guitar, but you can still teach them how to play. It just takes practice. And there are some people who want to practice and some people whose parents make them practice, but it's a talent and a skill for some people, and it's just a skill for other people. But it's something that is so necessary for being a productive member of society and not being taken in and defrauded and just living a fulfilling life that I can't imagine that there's really any good excuse for not teaching people how to do this.
I agree. Dave knows. I spent 23 years as a born-again Christian. I spent the last 23 years as an atheist. As a Christian, most of my focus was in apologetics and was in evangelizing Western cults, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, so forth and so on. So my skill set, if you will, was in being logical, in being rational, in being able to critique their interpretations of the Bible, and being able to show them where they were inconsistent with Orthodox Christianity. And for me, that was part of my conversion process, was realizing that a belief in God was the one thing that was off the table. It wasn't on the chopping block for me. It was an assumption, and it was in the back, and I never ever addressed it in the same manner that I addressed everything else. So yeah, it was a matter of doing that. And once that got on the chopping block, then the rest of the bricks fell by the wayside pretty quickly.
Yep. And that's why I think it's so important to teach people about epistemology. That was, I mean, what got me from Christian to theist is the stuff that this presentation was about. When I started reading the Bible, when I started reading about where the Bible came from, when I started studying the languages. But what got me from theist to atheist was learning about epistemology and learning that I have very little reason to be confident about the existence of a God at all, or the existence of anything supernatural. I mean, when I learned about Bayes' theorem and how evidence can weigh your understanding of how true something is, and I mean, that really changes a lot of things. And in my experience, most people who believe in God just never worry about it. It's not something they're interested in questioning. But for the people who are interested in questioning it, in my experience at least, I mean, they have not taken the time to learn about things like that. It's very, very unusual for a philosopher to be very religious. And I think there's a good reason for it, because when you are trained in logical thinking, when you are trained in epistemology, you very quickly see that it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We were actually going to do a discussion on epistemology.
I think one of my saddest experiences, and I'm sure you've had it happen to you too, was as an atheist when I was working, and I worked with a young lady. And she was a Christian, very conservative, very, evangelical. Her father was an evangelist and a missionary, and she grew up in a whole family of this. And we sat down to lunch every now and then, and we would talk about the Bible. And I remember at one point I asked her, and I don't remember what the specific topic was, but I said, well, all right. I said, if I can show you in the Bible that there's something wrong in there, that it really is wrong, and that you agree that it's not right, and I agree that it's not right, I said, will you change your view? And with a straight face, she looked at me and she went, nope. And I'm like, that's going to be the saddest thing for a human being, to be able to acknowledge that and maintain that position.
Yeah, I had almost the exact same experience. I had met this woman. So I used to, when I was in college, I used to table a lot for my atheist student group. And I would meet people regularly who would come up and ask questions about atheism. We had a big sign that said "Ask an Atheist," and occasionally somebody would want to speak more about something than we had time for out there. So I would go to lunch with them or have coffee or whatever, and we would talk for several hours. And I did this at one occasion with this woman. I think her name was Abby. I don't remember. It might have been Abby. Anyway. But yeah, so for like 2 or 3 hours, we talked about all of this stuff. She's a Christian, and I explained all the same type of stuff that we were just going over. And almost the exact same thing happened. I got her all the way to admitting that what she said has no basis in evidence. She has no reason to believe it, and she should not believe it. And I said, so are you going to stop believing it? She goes, no. I was like, you're fucking kidding me?
Yeah,
you just told me that you have no reason to believe it, that you should not believe it. It's
right.
Like, you're right there.
It's like you're wrong, you're wrong, you don't care you're wrong. It's like, okay.
I mean, that might as well have been what she said. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, There's nothing else I can say. You are detached from reality at this point. If you are admitting that you should not believe what you do, I mean that's the definition of irrationality. It's just like we were talking about before with being a workaholic. I should not do what I'm doing, and I know that, and I am admitting that, but I can't not do it. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's not rational.
And it's a hard I understand it's a hard decision. I know, when I did my transition, it wasn't making the logical decision wasn't the difficult thing. That was probably, in the scheme of things, the easiest part. The much bigger part was that I was attached to a community, to a group of people. That there was going to be peer pressure, there was going to be family pressure, there was going to be, just to be completely honest, I can remember having conversations with myself, going, well, if I make this change publicly, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know where I go anymore. I don't know where I belong anymore. It really is a huge transition for some people, and it's, I don't think it's tied to the logic, and I don't think it's tied to the reasoning at all. I think it's a personal issue. It's a human issue.
I think it depends on the person. I think that's definitely true for many people. It was for me too. I mentioned before I used to be a Christian worship musician for 4 or 5 years, and the last year that I did that, I was an atheist. I mean, I knew I was. Very few other people knew that I was. My girlfriend and my parents, that's about it. But I mean, the reason that I came out, I mean, clearly I lost my job. You can't continue to do that if you're
it's kind of hard, right?
Yeah, I knew it would, and that's okay with me. I didn't want to do it anymore anyway. I mean, that's why I finally came out, as I was tired of being two-faced and feeling awful about what I did for a living. But yeah, I mean, it took me a year to work up the courage. It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't really about. I knew I would lose friends, and I did, and it happened, and I knew that would happen. But it was more about just being honest and being true to what I knew I had to do ethically. And I knew that the right thing to do was to stop being part of this machine that brainwashes kids. And that's really what made me stop doing it, was when we started doing so at this church, we had a separate band that played for the youth groups, and I played for the main group, the main congregation. And at a certain point, they decided to integrate those so that the children were in with the main congregation. And playing music, worship music, to kids and seeing them be indoctrinated like that, and knowing this was my fault, that they were literally looking up to me on stage and believing what I'm telling them, I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I can't. I mean, I'm ruining these people's lives for the next 70 years or whatever, because of a paycheck. And I was like, fuck this, I'm out. And yeah, so I told the music director, I said, I'm an atheist, I can't do this anymore.
How much evangelism did you have to endure after that from your friends?
Some of them tried to save me, but when I think some of them maybe saw it coming, because at that point I was meeting with the senior pastor once a week, talking about all of this stuff, as far as historical criticism type stuff, because it was just a fascination of mine, and he had studied it as well. Of course, he didn't come to the same conclusion that I did, but I think he saw it coming. The music director was very surprised, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I felt a lot better after I did that, and I decided to go to college because I had never done that, and then I got involved with an atheist student group, and things got way better from there. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's different people take different paths. For me, it wasn't really. I wasn't upset or worried about losing friends. I wasn't thrilled about it. But for me, it was preferable to lose friends than to continue doing what I was doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yes, yes, the movement appreciates that.
I
No.
sleep better. So
Well, and I think that's it. And I think, even for me too, ultimately it was just being able to look myself in the mirror and to be honest with myself and not have this dichotomy that I was aware of and not dealing with.
right, and that's really what it is. Is that, I mean, you think about this thing that you believe in, that you're told is true, but you have doubts about it. And I mean, most people have doubts about it. I think it's either Pew or Gallup did a study about this, and something like 76%, I think that's right, of religious people sometimes doubt the existence of God. So it's definitely not like they're just certain about it. And I mean, that's encouraging to me. I wish it were higher. But a very small percent never question the existence of God. That is, they feel certain about it. And I think that's appropriately how it ought to be. I mean, it shouldn't be the majority. The majority of people should question their beliefs all of the time about everything. I mean, there are very few things that we should be really, really confident about, like evolution and gravity and a couple of things like that. I think we're safe to say.
We're safe. Yeah.
Those are true, but things that we have no evidence for, or so little evidence for, I mean, like we didn't really talk about this today, but I'm not entirely sure. I think it's about a 50-50 shot whether Jesus existed at all. And I have a whole article that I wrote about that, which I might turn into a talk at some point. But there's, I mean, I think being skeptical is a good thing, and you can apply it to so many things. And it's good for your brain to apply that that type of thinking. And if there's something that you are not allowed to question, that's the thing that controls you. And I mean, all you have to do is find out what you're not allowed to question, and it has power over you, and it enslaves you like that, and it's not right.
I think that, for the most part, when you talked about the 70% of people questioning whether God really existed, I really, except for a few delusional people, I really think that's closer to 99.9. Sam Harris talked about behavior being a good measure of what you believe. And he uses the example of the theater that's on fire. If you really believe it's on fire, and you really believe it, you're going to be running out the door screaming. We're not going to be sitting there having a dialogue about the theoretical possibilities of being burned, while the fire rages around you. And I think that a lot of Christians, I think if they thought about it, if you really, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around it, but if you really, really believed, the same way that, I believe that I'm sitting here with a roll of tape in my hand, if you really believe that there was an all-powerful, omniscient being and that he talked to you, I am sorry, the day-to-day life that you have would not be the day-to-day life that you'd have. I think your behavior would be significantly more bizarre, to say the least, or passionate than the way that you do behave, even though you claim to believe in God. So that's part of it too. I really don't think most people do. I think they all realize that there's nobody there. They all realize when they close their eyes and pray that they're not talking to anybody but themselves. So for me, it's just a matter of trying to get them to be honest for a second with themselves and just say to say it's okay to say I don't really know. I have far less problems with the person who says I believe in God, but I don't know if he exists, but I like the idea. Okay. As opposed to the person who wants to convince everybody that they're absolutely 100% certain that God exists, just like anything else that we see in our day-to-day lives.
Well, at least, I mean, somebody who is that sure, I mean, at least they're being consistent about it. At least they're saying that they believe it and they're acting on that basis. These street preachers and guys like that. I mean, if you really believed that people were going to burn and be tortured in hell for eternity unless you saved them, and you believed in the Great Commission, there's I mean, if you have any empathy at all as a person, any compassion, you would be
pounding on doors 24/7.
I mean, you would never rest until you saved people, and that's what street preachers do, and that's why they do it. I think some of them do it just for money, but yeah, I mean, people like I don't know if you know Brother Jed, the street preacher. He travels around to college campuses and stuff. He used to be a U.S. history professor at Wisconsin. Smart guy. He's been a full-time preacher for 40 years or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I've had dinner with him several times, and he's not crazy. He legitimately believes that people are going to hell, and he thinks the right thing to do, the ethical thing to do, is to warn them and to get them to believe in Jesus, so that doesn't happen.
But you said in the same sentence, but he's not crazy. How does that qualify?
He's deluded. He's deluded, but he's not psychotic.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he thinks certain facts about the world that are not. How do I put this? He believes things that aren't true, and in that sense that he's delusional. But he is not totally detached from reality as far as he understands the consequences of his actions and blah blah blah. But yeah, I think he really does what he does because he really cares about people, and any person who really claims to be Christian should be doing exactly what he does. When somebody says that they believe in hell and they believe that you'll go there if you don't believe in Jesus, and they believe that, you know, in Matthew, the Great Commission, that says that it's the job of Christians to go out and convert people, then why aren't you doing that? I mean, clearly one of those ingredients is not there if you're not out there doing it. Yeah, I mean, clearly we wouldn't have a functioning society if every single Christian was a missionary, but it's like, I mean, well, there's that, I don't know if you guys have seen this, do you know who Dark Matter 2525 is, the YouTuber?
No.
That sounds familiar.
He's got a YouTube channel, that's the name of it, Dark Matter 2525. And his videos are hilarious. They're these like animated kind of cartoony things.
Is that one where he does like the angel and the god?
Yep,
And they're always... Okay, yeah.
That's the one. Yeah, but he has one where it's something, the title is something along the lines of if Christians really believed what they say they do, or something like that. And it starts off with this guy in a hospital waiting for the doctor to come in, and the doctor comes in and he goes, "Great news." And the guy's like, "Tell me, what is it?" And he's like, "You've got brain cancer." And the guy's like, "Yes!" And he's just thrilled.
Right.
He's like, "You're so lucky." And like, he's like, "I can't believe it. It's just this is my big break." And you know, I mean, because he gets to go to heaven, right?
Yeah.
And without committing suicide, and he doesn't have to wait. And you know, I mean, it's like the old stand-up routine. I can't remember who did this originally, but you know, about the loophole about you can't commit suicide, but the Bible doesn't say anything about negligent or reckless behavior. So I mean, if you want to go, you just you should not see Christians wearing seatbelts. They shouldn't do it if they really believe what they say they do, because if they get in a car accident and they die and it wasn't their fault, then they go to heaven. So why would they ever do that? Except that, you know, in some states it's illegal not to wear one. But like,
well, yeah, that's the same thing as, you know, why would a Calvinist bother looking for cars before he crosses the street? It doesn't,
right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And I mean, clearly these people don't really believe what they say they do.
And that brings up the next question, though. So if you've got an adult who says, "I believe in God," I'm going to take him at his word. He says, "I believe in God. God talks to me. I talk to God." Should that be an automatic disqualification for public office or any job that has any kind of type of responsibility associated with it? Is he far enough by definition off the edge?
I have and probably will continue to vote for people who are religious, because we have a two-party system and it's the lesser of two evils. I would prefer to vote for somebody who isn't, just because that tells me. I mean, I'm not a single-issue voter, but I will think of you as less irrational if I know that you're an atheist. Granting that you are an atheist who is a self-examining atheist. There are also atheists who just don't care, but
default. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, if you're the type of atheist who is versed on the arguments and who just is an atheist on purpose, that tells me a lot about you as a person. That tells me that you think logically, that you care about critical thinking, that you care about the truth, and being honest with yourself, and things that I want in a someone in public office.
But like you said, you vote for a religious person if he's the lesser of two evils. But from our perspective, isn't voting for the religious person tantamount to voting for some guy who says that he talks to Elvis and he visits them in the middle of the night? I mean, to you and me, it's no different. So
Yeah,
we wouldn't vote for the Elvis guy at all because we'd think he's bonkers.
Not necessarily. I mean, if
No?
there was one candidate, I don't see any real difference aside from one is more socially acceptable than the other.
Right.
I don't see any real difference from believing that Elvis is still alive, like actually believing that, and believing in God or Jesus or whatever.
Right.
But if we had, if the two nominees from each of the major political parties in this country, if one of them believed that Elvis was still alive and one of them believed in fairies, I wouldn't care. I would say those cancel each other out, and now I want to look at their other issues as far as where they stand on birth control and abortion and all the other things I care about. Now, if one of them believed in fairies and the other one did not believe in anything supernatural, I would still want to consider all the other issues. I would be very encouraged by the fact that the one does not believe in anything supernatural. But like I said, there's more to choosing who to vote than just the one issue.
Really? So even if he had some really far out there social policy ideas, you would prefer the guy that believes in fantasy, or that's?
Well, it depends.
I hate to say crazy, but yeah.
Right. No, I mean, yes, that is a crazy belief. There's no rational reason or evidence to believe in fairies. But if it's a choice between somebody who is an atheist but who thinks that everybody should be forced to own a gun, which is the law in Kennesaw, Georgia,
Okay.
if he thinks that all abortions are always wrong in every single case, even rape and incest,
Yep.
who thinks that marriage equality is wrong, just
Right.
go down the list. And he's an atheist, I'm not voting for him. I'm sorry. I mean, I couldn't do that. But yeah, I mean, but if it were close, and that was the difference, then I don't know. I would always prefer to vote for somebody that is an atheist, all else being equal. But it's that et ceteris paribus thing that is the important part.
Okay. Dave, you're quiet.
You guys are getting everything in.
Well, we haven't talked about abortion. We haven't covered morals yet. We haven't covered ethical systems. We haven't covered. There's so much, Dave, we haven't gotten to yet.
I know it. And actually, the way that the Hangouts work is they only give you 4 hours, and we're on 3.5.
Okay.
I think I should probably. Yeah, it's 1 a.m. and I've actually got some work to do, so I think I'll get off of here. But yeah, I would love to do this again. I have a couple of others written. The epistemology one that we mentioned is ready to go, so we can do it. We've been doing these about once a month. We can do it next month if you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people were really into it. Really liked it. Getting a lot of positive comments out there in the Twitter sphere. And I was paying attention to the YouTube as well. Everything was pretty positive for the most part.
Cool. We should put in the description or something the time markers about where the presentation actually starts and where it stops, and we switch to Q&A so that people don't look at this and go, "Oh my God, it's 3 hours." Never mind.
Yeah, and I can also, have just the presentation, as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds good. Yeah, I had fun. And if people have questions about any of the stuff we talked about, not just the presentation, but any of the stuff afterward too, my email address again is dmuscato@atheists.org. That's dmuscato at atheists, that's plural, .org. And I'm happy to chat with you or whatever. On the description below this is my Twitter, and you're welcome to get a hold of me there as well, or call my office. And join American Atheists. It's $35 a year. I mean, a couple of dimes a day, really. It's almost
and
nothing.
You get the magazine. You get the quarterly magazine.
Yeah, you get the electronic version of the. I'm sorry, I just said it was 30 cents a day, and it's actually 10 cents a day, isn't it? If it's $35 a year, 365 days. Yeah, less than 10 cents. Anyway, yeah. But yeah, you get an official membership card. You get our members newsletter, which is. Let's see if I have it here. I don't think I have a copy handy.
Mine's right over here.
It's
keep going.
Great.
Keep doing your spiel.
Yeah, we just redid our newsletter. So it used to be this single-page trifold, glossy white piece of paper. Now it is a newspaper. It's on newsprint. It's tabloid size. It has actual articles. It's awesome. We're really proud of it. That's the magazine. That one just came out. So this is now in Barnes & Noble stores around the country. You can go to our website, atheists.org/magazine, for a interactive Google map of the location of any place that you can buy this. You can also subscribe on our website. It's $20 a year. We mail them to you if you would prefer to do it that way. But yeah, if you want to join American Atheists, just go to our website, atheists.org. You can join from there. And our convention, we mentioned this earlier, is in Salt Lake City this year. It's really going to be a lot of fun. What we're really trying to do that we haven't really done before, and that you're really not seeing from other organizations either, is we are intentionally bringing people in who are new to the atheist movement. At a lot of these conferences, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you see kind of the same people over and over, and that's good, and that we like these people. That's why we keep inviting them back. But the keynotes at this conference have never, there are 4 of them. None of them have ever spoken to an atheist audience before. They're all famous people who are atheists, but this is just not what they've done before. And we wanted to do that to show that this is not something that's exclusive to this just group of a couple thousand people who do this. But yeah, so Chris Cluey, who's the NFL football player, is our keynote. Barbara Hillary, who is this woman, she's an adventurer. She's 84, I think.
82, 84.
Or something, yeah, something like that. She's the first first woman to, I think that's accurate, the first woman to reach both the North Pole and the South Pole, and the first African American woman to reach the North Pole. And she didn't start doing this until she was 75, by the way. And she's currently planning her next one. Denise Stapley is, she's the winner of Survivor Philippines, the $1 million grand prize winner of that. She's also a sex therapist. She's awesome. She's going to be speaking. And Mark White, who is the bass player for the Grammy-nominated band Spin Doctors, is also going to be speaking. Yeah, and then we've got a whole bunch of your favorites. The whole list is on our website. If you go to atheist.org/convention 2014, there's also just a link to it on the main page. It's got all the info about that. But yeah, check it out. It's going to be really cool. Join American Atheists. I've been a member for a long time, even before I worked here, and it's something that I really encourage. It helps us out a lot. Yeah, follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Absolutely, and all that information is below in the description, so that with links. So if you want to look into more information, it's all right there. Also, want to thank Carl for coming on. Follow Carl on Twitter, the Twitter sphere, and thank everyone for watching and tuning in. And thank you all for supporting Atheist Hangouts. If you want more information, you can go to gammaatheist.com. Everyone have a wonderful night.
And to our special guest who never showed up, we're going to have you on next time, I hope.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I completely
so we don't want to spoil who it is, but you know who you are, so okay.
All right, I'll talk to everyone later.
All right, later, guys.
Hang on, Dave, a second. God, Dave, I'll let you take it off air.